Council. Prior to calling the roll, Commissioner Saltzman is unable to attend today's council session. His failure to participate would jeopardize the public interest, health, safety, or welfare. Therefore, unless there's an objection by any member of the council, Commissioner Saltzman will participate in today's hearing by teleconference for the entire session. Commissioner Fritz was also provided the opportunity, but she is unable to participate. Is there any objection to Commissioner Saltzman participating by phone? Sorry, Dan, there's no objection.
Great.
Please call the roll.
Fritz. Fish.
Here.
Saltzman.
Here.
Udaley.
Here.
Wheeler.
Here. The purpose of council meetings is to do the city's business. I'm going to shorten this a little bit. This is a hearing. There will be the opportunity for people to testify. You should assume that when people testify, not everybody will share the same opinion that you do. Our objective is to make sure that everybody feels safe, welcome, and respected in this chamber, regardless of their viewpoint or perspective. For that reason, we ask people not to applaud nor to boo anyone. A simple thumbs up is good, or a thumbs down if you don't like what you are hearing. Disruptions of people's testimony or council deliberations is not allowed. If anybody disrupts either people trying to testify or the city council trying to deliberate, you'll be asked to stop. If you don't stop, you'll be asked to leave. And if you don't ask to leave when asked to do so by security, you're subject to arrest for trespassing. That's a very rare circumstance. We don't want that to happen today, so let's all just be respectful of the fact that we are a community and we may approach the same issue from different perspectives and have different viewpoints. So with that, Carla, could you please read today's item?
Item 177, appeal on behalf of the Pearl District Neighborhood Association against Design Commission's decision of approval for design review with modifications and concurrent greenway review for the Fremont Apartments, a 17-story mixed-use building at 1650 Northwest NATO Parkway, LU 16-278621 DZM GW.
Very good, thank you. And first off today, the city attorney will be making some procedural announcements describing today's hearing.
Thank you, Mayor. Today is an evidentiary hearing. This means you may submit new evidence to council in support of your arguments. I'm going to talk a little bit about the order of testimony today. We begin with a staff report by the Bureau of Development Services staff for approximately 10 minutes. Following the staff report, City Council will hear from interested persons in the following order. The appellant will go first and has 10 minutes to present their case. Following the appellant, persons who support the appeal go next. Each of those persons will have 3 minutes to speak to council. After that, the principal opponent, in this case the applicant, has 15 minutes to address the City Council and rebut appellant's presentation. After the principal opponent, council will hear from persons who oppose the appeal, and each of those persons will have 3 minutes. Finally, the appellant will have 5 minutes to rebut the presentation of opponents to the appeal. Council may then close the hearing, deliberate, and take a vote on the appeal. If the vote is a tentative vote, the council will set a future date for adoption of findings and a final vote on the appeal. If council takes a final vote today, that will conclude the matter before council. There are several guidelines for those who will be testifying before council today. First, any letters or documents you wish to become part of the record must be given to the council clerk, Carla, on that side of chambers, after you testify. Similarly, originals or copies of slides, photos, drawings, maps, videos, or other items you show to council during your testimony, including any PowerPoint presentations, must be given to the council clerk to make sure they become part of the record. Second, testimony must be directed to the approval criteria. Any testimony, arguments, and evidence you present must be directed to the applicable approval criteria for this land use review or other criteria in the city's comprehensive plan or zoning code you believe apply to the decision. BDS staff will identify the applicable approval criteria as part of their staff report to council. Third, you must raise an issue clearly enough to give council and other parties an opportunity to respond to the issue. If you do not raise issues with enough specificity, you will be precluded from appealing to the Land Use Board of Appeals based on that issue. And finally, the applicant must identify constitutional challenges to conditions of approval. If the applicant fails to raise constitutional or other issues relating to proposed conditions of approval with enough specificity to allow council to respond, the applicant will be precluded from bringing an action for damages in circuit court. And that concludes my remarks.
Very good. Do any members of the council wish to declare a conflict of interest?
Mayor, I don't have a conflict of interest or ex parte conversations to disclose, but as is our custom, both proponents and opponents of the appeal have met with members of my staff.
Very good. Does any member of the public wish to ask Commissioner Fish about those contacts? Or does any other member of the City Council wish to declare a conflict of interest? No other member of the council has declared a conflict of interest. Do any members of the council have ex parte contacts to declare or information gathered outside of this hearing to disclose other than what Commissioner Fish has just indicated? I would like to say that I've seen a number of newspaper articles and news stories on this subject. Does anybody wish to ask me any questions about that? Seeing none, any other commissioners have any ex parte contacts to declare information gathered outside of this hearing that they'd like to disclose?
My office has received written testimony, and at least one member of my staff has met with individuals involved, but nothing to declare.
Very good. Anybody in this chamber have any questions for Commissioner Udaley based on the information that she has just provided?
Mayor, could we have the two members of council whose staff had met with some of the parties specify whether or not their staff conveyed that information to them or did not, please?
They did not convey any information.
So that's a good question. So what I get in advance of all land use hearings is a memo from staff laying out the issues. And in some instances, it contains recommendations from staff or issues to be highlighted, but it generally doesn't contain any ex parte information. It's the staff view. It's almost like a memorandum from a law clerk in a judicial proceeding. And that is what I get generally in these proceedings.
Does anybody have any questions of Mr. or Commissioner Fish on this matter? Seeing none, have any members of the council made any visits to the site involved in this matter? I'm certainly familiar with the site. I run by it periodically.
I'm familiar with the site. I haven't done any particular inspection.
I'll take you with me next time. Very good. Does any member of the public wish to ask any questions with regard to disclosed visits to the site? Seeing none, do council members have any other matters that need to be discussed before we begin the hearing? Commissioner Saltzman, I assume we're good to go for you?
Yes.
All right, very good. So let's start with the staff report, approximately 10 minutes. Good afternoon, name for the record. We don't need people's addresses.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. I'm Ben Nielsen, Senior Planner with the Bureau of Development Services. Today I'll be providing some basic context for the Fremont Apartments proposal and summarizing the final findings and decision of the Design Commission. There's a long list of appeal issues to address, so I may need an extra 3 to 4 minutes.
Just for the records, the staff report is an approximate time.
Okay.
And so you take the time you think you need to lay out the issue for the council's
I
benefit.
appreciate that. Thank you. First, the zoning context. The site is located in the North Pearl subarea of the River District subdistrict of the larger Central City Plan District. The site is zoned EXDG, which is short for Central Employment with Design and Greenway Overlays. The site has a base floor area ratio, or FAR, of 2-to-1 maximum. Additional FAR up to 3-to-1 may be earned through bonuses, transfers from historic resources, or from transfers in a Central City Master Plan. 3 types of bonus were earned on this site: the residential bonus, the locker room bonus, and the eco-roof bonus, together equaling 2.72 to 1 of bonus FAR. Total proposed FAR on the site equals 4.26 to 1, leaving some bonus FAR unused. The site has a base height limit of 100 feet. 75 additional feet may be allowed through modification to the North Pearl Subarea Height Opportunity Area standards. Areas where this is allowed are shown in green crosshatching on the map. Floors above 100 feet in height have limits on their floor plate size. The height of this proposal tops out at 175 feet at the top of the parapet, with an additional 10 feet granted through modification to the base zone standard for a rooftop mechanical screen. More on this later. This land use review consists of 3 parts, each with its own approval criteria. For the design review component, the approval criteria are the Central City Fundamental Design Guidelines and the River District Design Guidelines. These 2 documents are separate from the zoning code. For requested modifications through design review, the approval criteria are found in Zoning Code Section 33.825.040. For the Greenway review component, the approval criteria are found in Zoning Code Section 33.440.350 and the separate Willamette Greenway Design Guidelines. The site is located along Northwest Nadeau Parkway, adjacent to the Willamette River, and at the end of an existing segment of the Greenway Trail. The Fremont Bridge lies to the northwest. The site is 72,080 square feet in area and is essentially flat. It is currently developed as a surface parking lot for the adjacent 3-story office building. And here's a bird's eye view of the site. The green line on the image shows the extent of the Greenway Trail in this area. The proposal can be summarized as a 17-story residential mixed-use building with approximately 6,600 square feet of retail space on the ground floor and 275 residential units above. 152 parking spaces are proposed in a garage on a portion of the ground floor and in the basement. The proposal also includes a 60-foot wide pedestrian plaza on the north side and reconstructs the Greenway Trail on this site. The Design Commission ultimately voted 3-1 to approve this land use review. The appellant cites 13 design guidelines as not being met, challenges 6 of the 7 modification requests, and challenges interpretations of 4 sections of the zoning code. I'll briefly touch on each of these points with responses from the Design Commission's final findings and decision. Guidelines A2, A3, A3-1, A5-1-1, A5-1-5, A5-3, A5-4, and C-4 speak to the proposal's response to its context. The Design Commission found that the proposal supports the river and the Greenway Trail, has a massing concept that takes the view of the Fremont Bridge into account, incorporates a similar scale and massing in its building as other development in the North Pearl, and incorporates balconies, large areas of glazing, active ground floor spaces, and the large plaza, which reflect the North Pearl context and orient towards the river. Guidelines A4 and B5 speak to the proposal's response to the pedestrian environment. The Design Commission found that these guidelines are met with a series of storefront windows along the building's 3 public frontages, balconies, decks, roof terraces, and windows which orient to the river and the plaza, and the restaurant space which helps to activate both. Guideline C5, Design for Coherency. The Design Commission found that the proposal meets this guideline by setting consistent rules for articulation and fenestration of the building's distinct masses, with a well-integrated material palette. From the Willamette River Design Guidelines, the Design Commission found the proposal meets these guidelines by approximating the city's 200-foot block pattern, providing attractive ground floor uses along the Greenway, active ground floor uses along the Greenway, providing large areas of glazing and balconies overlooking the Greenway, and connecting the Greenway Trail to Northwest Nadeau through the proposed plaza. Regarding requested modifications to development standards, the appellant states that it was not mandatory for the Design Commission to approve any of the requested modifications and that they should have instead been reviewed through the adjustment process. In addition to providing approval criteria for modification requests, the zoning code also gives authority to the Design Commission to consider modifications of site-related development standards as part of the design review process. These modifications are done as part of design review and are not required to go through the adjustment process. However, modifications that are denied may be requested as an adjustment through the adjustment process. Moving into the modifications, modification number 1 addresses height and seeks to allow rooftop mechanical equipment and screening which extend above the height limit of 175 feet to be located closer than 15 feet to the roof edges on the street-facing facade and to allow them to cover 73% of the tower roof area, which is greater than 10% allowed by this code section. The Design Commission found that this mechanical screen is well integrated into the tower massing and that the purpose of the standard, which controls overall bulk and intensity of development, is met on balance with the small portion of the building footprint affected compared to the total building. Modification number 2 addresses standards for bicycle racks and seeks to allow long-term bicycle parking racks hung on walls in the bike storage room to be spaced at 1 foot 4 inches by 6 feet rather than the required 2 feet by 6 feet. The Commission found that the narrower spacing allows more room for active uses on the ground floor, better meeting several guidelines. And they found that the purpose of the standard, which is intended to ensure that bikes can be locked without undue inconvenience and are reasonably safeguarded from damage, is met with a condition of approval requiring a minimum 6-inch vertical stagger between racks. Modification number 3 addresses the North Pearl Subarea Height Opportunity Area standards and seeks to allow the height of the building to be 175 feet, exceeding the base height of 100 feet, and to allow the length of the building facades above 100 feet in height to exceed 120 feet in length. The Design Commission found that shifting building program and mass from the podium to the tower and allowing tower dimensions to exceed 120 feet in length allows for more of the Fremont Bridge to be visible than a building built up to 100 feet base height, better meeting guideline A2, and allows additional light and air to penetrate to the greenway and river over lower parts of the building.
So could you help me understand?
Absolutely.
And by the way, for everybody, regardless of where you are on this, questions stop the clock, just so don't feel like it takes from your time. So what does the orange box represent in this diagram?
The orange box in this diagram represents a building mass built up to the 100-foot base height.
And is that allowed under the base zoning?
That's allowed under Chapter 33.510, Central City Plan, yes.
Okay.
That would be considered the base zone height for the central city in this area.
Got it. And so what you were just saying then was they were allowed to build up higher as a result of bringing the base in closer? Is that a fair
Correct.
interpretation of
Correct.
what you were saying?
Yes. The
Okay.
Commission found that if they were able to lower the podium massing, which is the, I don't think I have a thing to point at here, but it's the lower stories of the building that extend out on either side.
I see. Okay.
They could get more view of the Fremont Bridge, and this view is taken from the Fields Park.
I see. Thank you.
Regarding the purpose of the standard, which is lengthy, the Design Commission found that it's also met. The purpose includes goals of increasing visual permeability, preserving visual and physical access to the river, allowing for light and air to penetrate to the public realm, and ensuring that bonus height does not significantly affect views of the Fremont Bridge. The Commission also found that these moves balance the purpose to develop a dense, active urban waterfront, while at the same time retaining the iconic stature of the Fremont Bridge in the skyline. To better meet that purpose statement, the Commission imposed a condition of approval requiring the retail space on the ground floor to remain in retail sales and services use for the life of the building. Modification number 4 addresses the required open area development standards, shadow standard, and seeks to allow up to 84% of the required plaza to be in shade at noon on April 21st of any year. The standard requires that no more than 50% of the plaza be in shade at that time. The Design Commission found that the proposed plaza width and location on the north side of the site between the existing office building and the proposed building approximate a standard right-of-way in the Pearl District and reflects the emerging development pattern in the North Pearl waterfront area. They also found that this allows for preservation of views to the river from Northwest Nato Parkway and portions of the North Pearl, such as the future intersection of Northwest 12th and Raleigh. The Design Commission found that the purpose of the standard, which is intended to allow for adequate amounts of light and air, in addition to providing recreational opportunities and options for pedestrian circulation, was met on balance, as the plaza would only be 26.5% covered in shade by 1 p.m. on April 21st. Excuse me, I should have advanced my slide there. Modification number 5 addresses 2 of the North Pearl sub-area waterfront development standards. The first part of the modification addresses the setbacks for all development from the Willamette River standard and seeks to allow portions of the building over 35 feet in height to extend into the setback area as shown on the diagram in red. For this standard, the Commission found that better views of the Fremont Bridge are provided by shifting massing to the tower and allowing it to extend into the setback. They also found that subsequent lower podium heights allow for larger areas of planted rooftop closer to the Greenway Trail.
Before you move off of that.
Yes.
Because I know this is a point of contention, so I want to make sure I understand it.
Yes.
So the building clearly is in the Greenway setback. And you are saying that there are exceptions made to the setback rule that have to do with the view of the Fremont Bridge. Could you explain that?
Absolutely. So the diagonal line is the setback in question here. There's actually 2 Greenway setbacks, and we're talking about the diagonal line.
Got it.
The Commission found, and this is related to one of the other modifications to height, allowing the building to go up to 175 feet, that moving some of the massing from the podium, which is the lower portion of the building shown here.
That was the orange box in your previous?
Right, that would extend up significantly higher here,
Okay.
the 100 feet.
Okay, and so it is at the discretion, in this case, of design review, if they
Project into that.
take less of the massing from the base and put it into the height, they have that discretion to cross into the diagonal Greenway setback?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, through a modification.
Through a modification? Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Yep.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
On a couple of occasions, you've mentioned better views of the Fremont Bridge. And so from the code perspective, what is the zone that's encompassed that has a view of the Fremont Bridge, and how do we determine whose view we're talking about?
In general, when I'm talking about views of the Fremont Bridge, I'm talking about views from the Fields Park, which is really one of the primary places you can see it in a public setting. And that's basically what the Design Commission focused their findings on as well. No one was taking into account any private views, only public views. And I might add that this view is not a protected view, so we're just working within the guidelines, within the context of the design guidelines approval criteria to preserve some of that view.
So I had a little something to do with the Fields Park. So let's assume this building was coming to us before the Fields Park was built. And what would then be the perspective that we'd be concerned about?
I think we'd have a lot more difficult time looking at views of the bridge as being an encumbrance on this project. We'd probably be taking a look at views only from rights-of-way, such as Northwest 12th Avenue or Northwest 13th Avenue, which I don't believe are blocked by this building.
Okay, thank you.
I also have a question.
Commissioner Daly, sure.
Thank you. It appears that the property adjacent on the north side has the same zoning.
Correct.
How about to the south?
It also has the same zoning.
Okay, so when and if those lots are developed, we're going to be looking at similar height allowances?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, continuing on to the second part of the modification to this standard, the maximum building dimension standard, to allow the building dimension perpendicular to the river to be 230 feet 9 inches in length, exceeding the maximum dimension allowed of 200 feet. For this standard, the Design Commission found that allowing the building to be longer perpendicular to the river results in a narrower building parallel to it, better meeting guidelines that aim for better connections, visual and physical, to the river and Greenway Trail. For both standards, the Commission found that the purpose statement, which states simply that the standards are intended to assure both frequent views of the river and physical connections to the river and its activities, are not negated by a modification to either standard. Last modification, modification number 7, addresses parking area setbacks and seeks to allow a required landscape setback between the south lot line and the driveway to be 2 feet wide and screened with a 3-foot tall concrete wall for a portion of its length and with 3-foot tall evergreen shrubs for the remainder, instead of the required 5-foot setback planted with trees and shrubs. The Design Commission found that allowing the setback area to be reduced in width allows for a larger area of the ground floor along Northwest Nadeau to be programmed with either active ground floor uses within the building or devoted to pedestrian-oriented open space. They found that the purpose of the standard, which is intended to create an environment that is inviting to pedestrians and transit users, is met with the urban frontage along Northwest Nadeau Parkway. Regarding the appellant's final 3 challenges
Can you go back to that, please?
Yes,
so
of course.
Does that mean that that space is required to remain an open space?
So we're just looking at the, it's probably hard to see on the screen, but it's a blue dotted area on the right side of the drawing.
Right, I see it.
Yeah, that's required technically to have a 5-foot setback with plantings in it, including trees. And the
Right, but you're
yes.
saying the exception is being given for the smaller set of trees, if
Yes,
I can.
exactly.
Because it creates more of an open space. Is that a public open space or a private open space?
That's referring to the plaza, so that's a public plaza.
Okay, thank you.
Plaza at the on the left side of this diagram.
Got it.
Yep. Sorry. Regarding the appellant's final 3 challenges to interpretations of the zoning code, staff has submitted information about those interpretations to council staff and contends that the code has been interpreted and applied fairly and accurately. And I can, of course, go into more detail if desired. The alternatives facing council today: deny the appeal and uphold the Design Commission's decision to approve the land use review; deny the appeal and uphold the Design Commission's decision to approve with additional conditions of approval and/or design revisions; grant the appeal and overturn the Design Commission's decision to approve, thereby denying the appeal. That concludes my presentation.
Very good. Thank you. Any questions? Very good. Next up is the appellant, 10 minutes, and I realize this is a complex issue, so unless legal counsel overrides me, if you need more time, the way we have historically handled this is we would document that additional time over 10 minutes and give the principal opponent that same additional time. Is that's good? Okay, great.
Yes, that's fine.
So start with your 10 minutes and let's see how you do. Good afternoon.
Thank you, Mayor and members of the council. My name is Jeff Kleinman. I'm the attorney for the Pearl District Neighborhood Association. We're going to try to keep it within the 10, which means
Thank you.
I've got to move very quickly.
Thank you, sir.
Because the folks to my right have architectural and planning expertise vis-a-vis the criteria here, and I'll introduce them and they'll do the lion's share here. But basically, what we're talking about in a nutshell is a project that might work elsewhere on a city block at some remove from the river, but not in its position on Front Avenue adjacent to the river and the Greenway. The height, the massing, the FAR, and other features of the proposal are inappropriate to the site and can't be approved under the approval criteria we've addressed in the appeal document. Now, it might be that there would be an argument to be made if this project we're able to argue, if the proponents could argue that we're providing affordable units and we've got to have this height and this mass and get close to the Greenway to jam those affordable units in, but that's not the case. This application came in under the wire, and there are no affordable units proposed. The application depends upon several modifications, as I say, none of which can be justified under the standard for those modifications. And it also depends upon a stacking, not just of the modifications to the standards, but also of two totally inappropriate precedents, the waterfront Pearl, and on the other side of the Fremont Bridge, the Bridgetown Lofts, which are far, far more respectful of the site, of the river, and of the approval standards. And I was very familiar with the waterfront Pearl, not so much with the Bridgetown Lofts. I suggest taking a walk on the Greenway up that way and seeing how respectful that development is and how little precedent it provides for this project. This project does set, if approved, a very dangerous precedent for riverfront development in this area, which will wipe out the view of the Fremont Bridge. There will be no further argument against such development if this is approved. So, for the benefit of council, and not to take too much time, we have prepared draft findings of allowance of the appeal and denial of the application. I've given those to the clerk at the commencement of the hearing, and there are copies for council and copies also for the city attorney. With that, let me introduce first Peter Gramlich, who has an architectural background, and then George Galster will speak, and he is a distinguished professor of planning.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Greetings, Mr. Mayor, City Commissioners. Thank you for the chance to lend my voice to the discussion. I'm the tireless one at the moment between the attorney and the urban planner. I also own Gramlich Design and Planning in Portland. My degrees are in architecture, and I am a LEED accredited professional. I've worked for big firms in Boston and in Germany, and I've helped design projects in the US, Europe, the Middle East, and Asia, including high-rises. I teach architecture at PCC Sylvania, where my students learn about building design and construction and are part of the next generation of people who will help shape the Portland of the future. As we emphasize in class, architecture is inseparable from proper planning. Both are at issue here. I've tried to evaluate this Fremont Place proposal as one of them that my students might submit for studio review. If they did, it would not likely get past the schematic. It wouldn't. In other words, we would say, back to the drawing board. And why? Because this proposal violates the most basic principle of design. First, do no harm to your surroundings. The city has both mandatory and discretionary criteria to prevent such harm from taking place. And in this case, as outlined in the appeal statement filed by the association, the project as proposed violates most of these criteria. Speaking from my expertise and experience, and taking all of the approval criteria into account, I would simply note the following 4 points. 1, the project has an inappropriate massing concept, one which does not respect Portland's block pattern and does not reflect the identity of the Pearl District neighborhood. It detracts from the neighborhood by sealing it off from the river and setting a precedent for more of the same in the future. At its core, it is not part of the neighborhood. It is a barrier. 2, it detracts from the character of the waterfront area rather than reinforcing it. It seals the Willamette River Greenway off from the neighborhood and the public as a whole, effectively seizing it for private benefit. 3, the proposal does not in any way complement the context of existing buildings. It instead establishes a dangerous new context, a precedent for overscaled massing and for walling off this stretch of the Willamette in its entirety. And finally, 4, the proposed design itself lacks a clear vision or even unifying elements. It tends to present itself as a contorted Rubik's Cube, twisting and convoluting itself in an attempt to maximize out floor area. As you take these failings into account, bear in mind that code also requires each of the requested modifications to the city's standards to, quote, better meet design review requirements. In other words, the modifications must benefit the design itself, not just the applicant's pocketbook. Here, they do not. you should send this project back to the drawing board for a design that meets the city's requirements. Thank you for your consideration, and I'll pass it on to George.
Let me just ask you one question. In light of the likelihood that there's going to be additional development along that stretch of the river, what standard would you have us apply in terms of the context? Because I'm somewhat reluctant to embrace a standard that says we have to be bound by a context that is likely within a number of years to change. And it's a context that's a residue of a different set of uses along the river. So what is the appropriate standard where we know there's going to be redevelopment?
Sure, that's a valid point. Of course, we can't just say this, the only context we're responding to is that which existed from 1960 at low-slung industrial buildings, right? But context is a sensitive, delicate, important matter, and I think it lies at the core of everything we're talking about here. I suppose another way to think about it is precedent. What kind of precedent do we want to be setting with the public and private faces that we're presenting our citizens, our greenway, our natural areas, our parks, our views? So I think it's hard to lecture as to what context should be. I just am wary about the precedent that we're setting if we build something of this scale and size.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. There are three major reasons for sustaining the appeal of the PDNA. The Design Commission incorrectly applied design guidelines and Portland zoning regulations.
And sir, I'm sorry to interrupt you. You have to say your name for the record. Sorry about that.
Sorry, George Gallister.
Thanks, George.
Thanks. First of all, it approved building modifications that degrade design review requirements. It set a dangerous precedent for the long-term development of the River District, and it accepted the developer's miscalculation of site area for the purposes of determining allowable building mass. As Mr. Nielsen pointed out, these are the applicable guidelines that the Design Commission must take into consideration. If you look at these guidelines and all these documents, they are quite consistent in their desire to enhance Portland's personality. And they give specific ways in which our building is supposed to enhance our personality by first emphasizing Portland themes, integrating the river into the community, supporting parks and public spaces, enhancing and protecting views, and reinforcing special districts. But let's not take these in generality. Let's see specifically what the guidelines say with regard to each of these 5 points. Emphasizing Portland themes. Quote, there are many themes unique to Portland's culture and geography that promote the city's identity and image. Examples of elements that identify Portland include roses and bridges. Integrating the river into the community. The Willamette River is the Center City's most significant geographic feature. The bridges that cross the river reinforce the river's role as the binding element of the Center City. Supporting parks and public spaces. The Tanner Creek Parks, that is Jameson Square, Tanner Springs Park, and Fields Park, function as both a neighborhood park system and as one of Portland's primary promenades, extending the North Park blocks northward to the Willamette River. Thus, we aim to strengthen and enhance the Tanner Creek Parks. Enhancing and protecting views. Quote, taking advantage of surrounding view opportunities increases the desirability of living, visiting, and working in the Center City. Thus, we aim to size and place new buildings to protect existing views. Reinforcing special districts. Design should acknowledge that the context of its surroundings with an approach that responds to the character and identity of 3 blocks in every direction. Let's keep these in mind as we look at the decisions the Design Commission made. First of all, they approved building modifications that degrade these design review requirements. The zoning code clearly allows only modifications that both will better meet the applicable design standards and be consistent with the purposes of the standards in question. The purposes of the standards in question are clearly spelled out in the zoning code. Some of these were nicely reviewed by Mr. Nielsen. Quote, increase access to sunlight along the greenway, facilitate visual and physical access to and along the riverfront, create expanded opportunities for views of the river as viewed from locations west of the riverfront, And last but hardly least, ensure that bonus height granted to sites adjacent to the Fremont Bridge do not significantly affect views of or diminish the aesthetic qualities of the bridge or its iconic stature in the Portland skyline. The Design Commission essentially approved modifications that allow the Fremont apartments to be taller and fatter than are permitted by code. Does this supersized building better meet and be more consistent with the purposes of the design standard? I think the answer is obvious. Point 2, the Design Commission set dangerous precedents for the long-term development of the River District. Future developers will expect that they too will be allowed to build as massively as the Fremont apartments. Consider what this will mean for our future. It will convert this current picture to this picture if we permit the Fremont apartments as currently proposed. The developer immediately to the south will be able to build that. The developer of Centennial Mills will be able to build that. And I ask again, would this enhance Portland's personality? Would this emphasize Portland themes? No, it minimizes the bridge and the river. Would this integrate the river into the community? No, it walls off the river from the community. Would this support public parks and public spaces? No, it degrades the value of the Fields Park. It degrades the value of our greenway. Does it enhance and protect views? Here, notice the doublespeak the developer is trying to get you to believe. We enhance the view by only obscuring half of the bridge instead of all of it. And last, does this reinforce special districts? No. Quite the contrary. This development will set in motion a long-term development pattern that will be the poison pill for the Pearl. Third, the Design Commission accepted the developer's miscalculation of the site area for purposes of determining allowable building mass. Again, the zoning code is clear. All measurements involving development standards are based on property lines and area of the site after dedication of public rights of way. The developer did not do this, and as a result, they exaggerated their buildable site by 70%. We wouldn't be having this discussion if the basics of planning were followed correctly in this case. To conclude, the case of the Fremont Apartments represents a crucial decision point for Portland. Will we hold fast to our duly adopted plans for a humane, livable, distinctive city, or will we build at all costs, including violating our own zoning codes? The Design Commission has opted for the former, the latter, and we hope that you will opt for the former, because this is simply the wrong building for a special site. Thank you.
Thank you. Colleagues, any questions before we move
Just have
on to
one
next?
question,
Commissioner
Mayor.
Fish?
Mr. Kleinman, I think at the beginning of your presentation, you mentioned in passing that this building would not be subject to our affordable housing requirements under inclusionary housing. I'm glad you mentioned that because over 15,000 units were filed ahead of the deadline. So with all due respect to some of the critics of this policy, we're not going to really know whether inclusionary housing has had any potential positive or negative impact until the 15 to 20,000 units in the pipeline are built that aren't subject to inclusionary housing. And it seemed to be, they were highly motivated developers that beat the deadline. And so we've got 3 years of product in the pipeline. And it seems like it's going to make it extremely difficult to gauge the effectiveness of inclusionary housing with all this development that's not covered. But let's just take inclusionary housing as a concept. Had this building been subject to that requirement, and so if there were more affordable units in this building, would that change your analysis at all in terms of public benefit?
I'm not sure it would change my analysis very much, but I think it might change the council's analysis a little bit, because there would be a further argument of additional public benefit for this humongous massing and overshadowing of the Greenway, which is quite unparalleled. Again, as an advocate for my client, I have to say, it might not affect my arguments, but it might affect the council's perspective.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Very good.
I had a question, Mayor.
Commissioner Saltzman.
I was intrigued by the statement the developer has exaggerated the site area by 70%. Could somebody elaborate what they mean by exaggerated?
I can, Commissioner Saltzman. This is Jeff Kleinman again. We set this out to some extent in the appeal narrative that we filed, and it's set out in a bit more detail in the proposed findings sustaining the appeal that we've circulated. But it's also something that's going to be the subject of some detailed testimony going forward. There's a very organized presentation coming up to,
Okay.
Okay. But in a nutshell, on that point, there are several portions of the site that have been included in the square footage for development purposes, which do not belong in the calculation, and they're very significant. One is that the applicant measures the site down into the Willamette, down to the ordinary low water line, when in fact by state law, which is set out in the findings we wrote, the state and the people of Oregon own up to the ordinary high water line. And we're not sure what that distance is that's been included, but it's a lot and it's got to go. This application isn't sustainable as it is. And then the other component of that, to answer briefly, is for all practical purposes, the Greenway area itself, the Greenway Trail and Path, and the 60-foot strip on the north that's a public walkway to the river are essentially dedicated, whether as public or private rights-of-way, and as such, by city code, and we cite the code in what we've submitted, they are not to be included in the developable area for the purpose of calculating FAR. So you wind up with a much, much lower permissible FAR. By my calculation, for what it's worth, at most 40,000 square feet is the developable area, and not something closer to 80,000 square feet as characterized in the application.
Okay.
So I hope that answers.
Thank you, yes.
Very good. Thank you.
Thanks again, Mayor.
Appreciate it.
Councilors.
Next up, we have the principal opponent. You get 15 minutes, but the appellant went 2 minutes and 4 seconds over. So if you want, you have 17 minutes and 4 seconds. I'm sorry. I'm out of order. Sorry. Thank you. Supporters of the appeal. Carla, when you have a suspicion, you're usually right. So shout it out.
Okay.
Yes. How many do we have?
36.
Okay, so here's my usual speech. Quantity is not as important as quality. And if people feel like you are hearing other people already make your comments, absolutely feel free to either just thumbs up, or if you want to come up and stand behind somebody or point somebody from your group, if you will, and you may go up and stand behind them and be recognized, or alternatively, just come to the mic and say everything that I have wanted to say has been said, in my opinion, is X, so that you have registered your opinion for the record. But you do not necessarily need to feel that you need to repeat the same arguments 36 times if that is the case. First three, please, Carla.
Are Stan Penkin, John Wilkinson, and Kurt Sorensen, and they'll be followed by Alan Potts, Christina Del Rosario, and Mark Wyndham.
And again, just name for the record, please. We don't need people's addresses. Stanley, do you want to kick us off, please?
Yes, I will. Good afternoon. I'm Stan Penkin, President of the Pearl District Neighborhood Association. My testimony is going to be more at a 30,000-foot level rather than getting down into the nitty-gritty. You have just heard compelling expert testimony on why the proposed Fremont Apartments is the wrong project in the wrong place. But this appeal, approved by a significant majority of our board, is about far more than a building. It's about who we are, where we're going, our vision, and what we are leaving to our children, grandchildren, and generations beyond. Portland has been a model for visionary thinking, smart urban growth, and innovative planning. Having worked with the Planning Bureau as a member of the Portland Plan and Comprehensive Plan Community Involvement Committee for 7 years, I've seen firsthand the passion and dedication of our planners in developing policies that work for the betterment of our city for everyone. It's not just about buildings. It's about considering every aspect of our daily lives, from where we live, where we work, where we play, where we walk, where we bike, where we drive, how we all interact as a community, and how that works in harmony. It's about livability, sense of place, and connection to our rivers and mountains that are all ingredients that make us such an amazing city. The Fremont Apartments, as currently designed, is a contradiction of those values, our aspirations, and established policies that make people want to be here in the first place. The Pearl District does not oppose development. The neighborhood has been a mecca for smart development, guided by visionary planning that takes into account all the values just mentioned. We are a vibrant and diverse community because of that. But after hearing our community's concern in a public process, we do oppose misplaced development that will harm and detract from the character, spirit, and soul of this unique neighborhood, not to mention the river that belongs to all of Portland. As you heard, the Design Commission's approval of this project was a close 3-to-1 vote, with the minority opinion representing much of what we are speaking of today. That opinion was by the Commission's chair, Julie Livingston, who I believe is here today. As there does not appear to be a process in this current appeal format whereby a minority opinion is heard, in the spirit of City Council's recent resolution that all voices be heard, I am asking that Julie be invited to express her opinion for your consideration. We are in the throes of enormous growth, where rampant development has outpaced our ability to control it.
Stan, I'm going to need you to rock.
I'm there. While we await approval of Central City 2035. Please do not allow this massive, misguided project to go forward as a contradiction to all that we value and cherish.
Thank you, Stan. And I don't like to be the microphone police, so please, when you see 30 seconds, that's when the yellow light comes on. Please stop when you hit the red. Thanks. Good afternoon.
Thanks, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Mayor. And greetings from the tourist section across the lobby over there. I won't try to go into the detailed technical aspects of these things. That's been well covered already. But my comments to you are the community reasons for denying this project. It really involves what we want Portland to be and going forward. The waterfront of the Willamette has been and is very important, has been in the entire history of the city for various reasons that have changed over time. It's still very important to the city and the people that live here now. Parks. Portland has a national and international reputation with regard to city parks. And that needs to be reinforced, not torn down. And the Fremont Bridge. Of course, it was put in place at great community input and great expense. It's now an icon. It's shown in most pictures that relate to the city, promotional materials and the like, as you well know. Just a note on the Fields Park. You probably know this already, I hope that you do, but it's quickly become a very heavily used park. People walk there daily from several blocks away in all three directions to get to the park. The dog leash off area has a lot to do with that. And just as I left the community a few minutes ago, or a couple hours ago now, I counted 23 people in the park on a snow day, 12 dogs, and the people that take care of them. And often, if we look on the park, we'll see as many as 20 dogs or more in there at one time. It's quite a thing, and that's going to get only more overused and undersized as regard all these additional units come on stream. There must be 1,000 within walking distance coming up that are yet unoccupied. So seems to me that we've got here what is a greedy San Francisco landowner who's trying by all means and a certain amount of pulling the wool to maximize the amount of living units that can be shoehorned into that tight space. And I would just ask the landowner and developers, if this were San Francisco, the hometown of the owner, and you were proposing this building to be between the Marina Park and the Golden Gate Bridge, how do you think it might be dealt with?
Thank you, sir.
Good time.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Kurt Sorensen. I'm a resident of the Pearl District. We bought here after researching the various land use plans for this district. The proposed Fremont Apartments will destroy that good planning framework. I oppose the proposal for the reasons set forth in detail in my filed testimony. The consistent theme of the plans since the Central Plan of 1987 require that building height and bulk be scaled down from the west as the river is approached. In the North Pearl waterfront, that means stepping down height from the west part of the Pearl District. The primary zoning tool used to accomplish this is a FAR of 2:1, as opposed to the 4:1 or 5:1 ratios applied in the Pearl District west of NATO. This is augmented by other provisions such as height restrictions, facade restrictions, open space and view corridor restrictions, code provisions to impose a Portland block pattern for lot size, and the greenway overlay. The block pattern section are important along the river because there are no streets to create the normal grid pattern. The problem with relying principally on FAR is that the base must be defined so that the base floor area can be determined. If it is not, then FAR loses its regulatory and predictive value. See the graphs at page 4 of my testimony. The ordinary application of FAR in the central city is to a standard block of 40,000 square feet. The entire area of the block is thus buildable. That works well, but as discussed at pages 2 and 3, the scheme collapses on unusual lots such as those along the river. The code defines FAR in the traditional way. It is ambiguous in defining site. Reliance on unpublished custom or habit fails if there are no constraints. The unintended consequence is a building that is at odds with the zoning and plans. Compare Fremont to waterfront Pearl, where size was limited by sound zoning constraints. My written testimony illustrates the cumulative effect of an exaggerated base floor area when bonuses are applied. If the goals of the plan and the code are to be met, the building restrictions must be treated the same as the rights-of-way in the downtown blocks. Waterfront Pearl conforms to the block grid pattern. Fremont Apartments does not. Concluding, the approach used for Fremont Apartments will completely subvert all existing plans. The use of FAR as restrictive and predictive will be lost. Allowing this building would be like cramming a whale into a bathtub and would provide a negative precedent for the remaining parcels along the river. It would predict a high, hard wall against the river, separating the river from the rest of the community. In the downtown Pearl, the proposed building would fit. On a standard block, it would have a perfectly acceptable FAR of 7.68:1. That is not true here.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, all three of you. Next three, please.
Next three are Alan Potts, Christina Della Rosario, and Mark, I believe it's Linden for the last name?
Lindell.
Lindell, thank you. And they'll be followed by Michael Roberts, Bruce Kaplan, and Michael Coates.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon. Thank you. My name's Alan Potts. I'm a Pearl District resident, and I live at 949 Northwest Overton Street. I agree with the opinion of the chair of the Design Commissioner in her dissent when she concluded that the Fremont Apartment proposal negatively impacts the Willamette Greenway and its use by all Portlanders and visitors who enjoy the waterfront. In order to expand the size of the Fremont Apartments, the developer sought a modification that would allow it to exceed the maximum 200-foot depth set out in the code. This modification means that a 5-story building will directly abut the 25-foot Willamette Greenway. And while the Greenway is the bare minimum of 25 feet path along that Greenway, that Greenway is much smaller sometimes and as narrow as 13 feet. On the south waterfront, planners had the foresight to preserve the Greenway park-like setting for hundreds of feet from tall construction so those enjoying the waterfront would not be overwhelmed by looming buildings. We have the direct opposite with the Fremont Apartments proposal. It will literally cast a shadow over the walkway during the summer hours. I understand that the size of this parcel cannot support a dedication of 100 feet or more of the widths devoted to the Willamette Greenway. That is why every foot given over to development is so important. The developer received a modification allowing it to add 30.9 feet of depth to the building. That is 30.9 feet that would have been devoted to making the Willamette Greenway a more viable public space. This modification does nothing to enhance the waterfront. In fact, it does the opposite. The actual 13-foot width of the path in some places will make it dangerous for cyclists and pedestrians walking in tandem to pass one another without risk of a collision. In addition, the new Central City Code will require a 50-foot setback, meaning that the Fremont Apartment project will extend 25 feet further towards the Willamette River than all the new construction in that segment of the NATO Parkway, including Centennial Mills. Thus, it will continue to be a bottleneck and stick out like a sore thumb. The Fremont Apartment proposal should be rejected. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Cristina Del Rosario. I'm a retired nurse. We moved to Portland 2.5 years ago after deciding to retire. The parks, trees, access to transportation, walkability, bike lanes, and a sense of community. Portland won our hearts. It has everything to offer to every age group, from infants to seniors. And I'm sure this did not happen without the mindful planning with the builders, investors, and the citizens of the community. And I'm here today to continue to support that legacy. The city is changing at a very fast pace, and as a foot patrol volunteer, I have seen some ugly consequences, but I'm not here to talk about it right now. I'm here today to make sure we continue to work together with the builders, investors, and the citizens of this community to make sure we do not compromise the identity which makes Portland the model for other cities. Let's keep its uniqueness, its beauty, the trees, the parks, access to transportation, walkability, bike lanes, and the trails along the Willamette River so we can continue to enjoy and the future generation of the beauty and uniqueness of our city we call home. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Thank you. My name is Mark Lindau. I have been a physician. I was first in 1976. During this period of time, I felt that this was a very quinky type of a little town. For example, with the founding fathers, there were two different grids. One was going north, direct north. The other was going in the direction of the star, the North Star. It's just different. Now, during the period of time that these fathers went, they visited Europe. During that period of time, they found that there was an amazing park that was going through the cities. As a result, we now have a parking that went from the PSU all the way into Northwest. But unfortunately, one of the founders had died, and he did not have a will. Because of that now, we have 4 blocks of buildings that is interrupted by the complete park. When I arrived here, I was amazed by the absolute amazement of the tunnel that went into 26 and into downtown. The Mount Hood went framing for that absolute place. In 1992, the Coin building was there. Now we get to see the beautiful Coin, the mount, instead of the mountain. Gentlemen, that's all I have to say. You've got a clunker.
Thank you. Thanks, all 3 of you. Next 3, please.
Are Michael Roberts, Bruce Kaplan, and Michael R. Coates, and they'll be followed by Glenn Traeger, Michael Foll, and Larry Mazer.
Good afternoon.
Hi, how you doing?
Good.
You want to go first?
Sure.
Thanks.
My name is Bruce Kaplan. I've been a resident in the Pearl District for the last 10 years. Portland is a vibrant community in a spectacular location. While we've been blessed with that geography, our livability has been enhanced by the visionary leadership of our city government. When we brag about Portland to others, we often talk about the city having the courage to choose Waterfront Park over Harbor Drive, the foresight to protect Forest Park from residential development, and the smarts to convert old warehouses into the Pearl District, a model for cities around the world. We've reached another one of those crossroads. Does the city serve the public better by creating yet another high-rise luxury apartment, or do we decide it's better to prevent the walling off of our waterfront? In 2009, the Project for Public Spaces created a blueprint for cities that envision their waterfronts as destinations to keep people coming back. The project calls its recommendations rules of thumb drawn from 32 years of experience working to improve urban waterfronts around the world. The project goes on to 13 recommendations. I'll mention a few. The first is make public goals the primary objective. When the city considers its waterfront to be a public asset, it's easier to put public goals ahead of financial expediency. Another rule, optimize public access. The accessibility of the waterfront is crucial. Waterfronts with continuous access are much more desirable than ones where public space is interrupted. Massive buildings that almost touch the water are not going to leave much space for folks to enjoy the beauty of the Willamette and its river traffic. Another rule worth mentioning, design and program buildings to engage the public space. The ideal combination is to have both commercial and public uses as opposed to high-rise buildings that physically and psychologically cut off the waterfront from the surrounding neighborhoods. I cite these examples, but I'm sure you're very aware of these. Let's look to the future a little bit. You're taking your family or friends to Fields Park to enjoy the sun, watch children run across the grass, or get a close look at the waterfront. Would you rather say to your family and friends, see how the beautiful arch of the bridge appears over the water? I help protect those laws. Or would you rather say, see those apartment buildings over there? You used to be able to see the arch of the bridge and the waterfront, but I voted to allow these buildings to be constructed. I hope I know what your answer will be. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Oh, hello. My name is Michael Roberts. I live in the Pearl at the Sitka. I am the manager of the Pearl Foot Patrol. In October 2017, I was elected to serve on the Pearl District Neighborhood Association board. My comments today are as an individual, not representing the board. My testimony will focus on an email exchange that you have in front of you. It was an exchange between TVA Architects and the entire PDNA board. It occurred December 27, the day of the PDNA board was voting on whether to appeal and file the appeal. TVA seems to be frustrated with the democratic checks and balance processes of PDNA committees and the board. The emails turned from frustration to, in my mind, intimidation with comments like, 1, this type of appeal will serve to reduce your ability as a neighborhood to have a voice in upcoming development in the Pearl. 2, the result, I believe, of appealing a project like this will be that the future projects will skip the PDNA altogether, which will greatly lessen your voice on development in your own neighborhood. 3, neither of these conditions not being met, has merits as an appealable item, so your appeal will only serve to delay the project by a couple of months. 4, it is likely to cost members of the design team, TVA's design team, their jobs. And 5, it will also come at the expense of the goodwill between your group and the development community in general. This is not neighborly, nor, in my opinion, an acceptable way to talk to representatives of a community. I have heard people say that they are afraid of the development community in Portland, and there is nothing citizens can do to stand up for them. I have a different opinion than that of the development community. Don't I have a right to express it? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, how you doing? My name is Michael Coates. I'm a citizen.
Thanks, Mike.
I had a bunch of great points to talk about, but everybody else has brought them up and said them better than I ever could. Except I haven't heard one very important thing. This project is a Trojan horse, and once it gets in our gate, it's over. Developers are buzzing around seeing this will be approved or not because that big, ugly wall that was shown so graphically well on this slideshow, it'll happen. And of course, as politicians, you know how unpopular it is to build walls these days, right? And I hope that you understand what's important here is not the view of a bridge. That's not what it's about. It's not even about this building. It's about the riverfront future, as been stated, of the city of Portland for its citizens and its visitors. And it's the access. If that gets blocked, we're in real trouble. So this vote is much, much bigger. Your vote is going to have a big, big impact on the future for all of us. And all I ask is that you think very carefully, please. Thank you.
Thank you. And I just want to remind everybody, great points, but we are serving in the capacity of a hearing. And so what we are actually doing here is looking narrowly at the appeal and the appeal process and the decisions that were made by the Design Review Commission. I just want to be very, very clear that in our role as a hearings body today, we are very prescribed in terms of what we are looking at. That's not to invalidate your point, but I just want people to be very clear about what it is we are doing here. I don't know if legal counsel wants to comment on that.
Essentially, council is required to look at the criteria for the review and base their decision based on those criteria. And so even if, if they find, I'm not saying this particular proposal, but on a proposal that maybe they don't personally like very much, but they believe that it meets the criteria, they're obliged to approve it if it meets the criteria. So again, not saying anything about this particular application, but.
Yeah, I wanted people to be very clear about what role we are playing here
Yes.
today as a city council.
Since I left a minute and 59
Yes, sir.
seconds, I may have a couple more.
Sure. It's your
But
time.
also, yes, it's about the specifics, but don't forget the specifics are there to support an overall livability and philosophy of what we're doing here in the city of Portland and in the Pearl. So it all goes together in my opinion, but that's just my viewpoint. Thank you.
Good point. Thank you all. Next three, please.
Next three are Glenn Traeger, Michael Fold, and Larry Mazer, and they'll be followed by Christy Nash, Demersmuch, and Melanie Yo.
Good afternoon, sir. Why don't you start us off?
Good afternoon. My name is Glenn Trigger, and I'm a board member of the Pearl District Neighborhood Association and a member of its Planning and Transportation Committee. I became actively involved in the Fremont Apartments at the end of last year when I found this project would encroach upon the Willamette River Greenway by building a high-rise apartment building within a few feet of the Greenway path. I'm an active user of the Greenway and could not believe the Design Commission would give away a 175-foot by 30-foot strip of riverfront property to a developer. The encroachment of the Greenway buffer is a result of modifications requested by the Fremont Apartments and should be denied. The Greenway and its adjacent buffer should be reserved for the enjoyment of the public as mandated in the Central City Plan. I asked the City Council to do two simple things. Just follow the Central City Plan. The Pearl did not become one of the best neighborhoods in the country by chance. It took hundreds of hours of dedicated effort from Portland residents, city officials, and land developers to establish guidelines for its development. The Pearl Plan, the River District Plan, the North Pearl Plan, and the Central City Plan were all created out of this effort. It is important that the Fremont Apartments follow existing land use plans since it will be an important element in the large stage of future development along the Willamette River. Secondly, please listen to the citizens in this room, to the citizens at our town hall, and to the hundreds of citizens who signed our petition at the Fields Park on a cold winter weekend and approved the Pearl District Neighborhood Association appeal of the Fremont Apartments. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Larry Mazer. Modification number 5 gives the developer an extra 30.9 feet of building room that directly encroaches on the Greenway. I sat through numerous design commission hearings and had numerous discussions with staff. I can tell you that those folks are dedicated and well-meaning, but they are also overwhelmed with the construction boom in this city. As a result, Parks and Recreation only got involved in this process a few days before the final vote. I know this for a fact because I testified before the commission in November and pointed out that the width of the Greenway walk was far less than the standard set out by Parks and Rec. Staff for the commission did contact staff for Parks and Recs after my testimony. Parks and Recreation finally got a chance to weigh in via a letter dated December 15, 2017, and I've attached that for you to see. While the letter addresses the width of the revised walkway, it is silent on the 30.9 feet giveaway to the developer because that ship had already sailed. This was an egregious mistake. While Parks and Recreation did approve the expanded walkway, it requested that the developer extend out the handrail another few feet towards the river. That shows you how desperate Parks and Rec was to gather as many extra feet as they could. So in summary, the Design Commission was approving a 30.9-foot encroachment on one side of the Greenway when Parks and Recreation was begging for an extra 2 feet on the other side of the Greenway. And that's solely because they weren't involved in the front end. For whatever reason, staff didn't coordinate, and Parks and Rec had no involvement in this process until literally a few weeks before the vote. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Michael Gould, resident of the Pearl. Thank you very much for this time. Most of my topics have already been covered. I would like to speak to this one, though, as well, is that if you look north of the Fremont Bridge, you see the nice wide expanse ways to walk. If you go down in front of Waterfront Pearl, you see the same thing. The infringement and the pinch that's going to happen there is just there's no continuity to it whatsoever. So to me, it makes no sense. The other one that hasn't been brought up, and it also helps to going towards mass of this building, is this locker room for bicyclists. Certainly makes sense in a commercial building. I would just definitely agree with that, where people may bike to work, take a shower, and so forth. But this is a residential building, so you're expecting them to put the bike in, come back downstairs, take a shower, and go back up to be able to have additional mass. It's a loophole that's definitely been exploited that I definitely think is not even rational. Most all my other points have been made, but I will say this, is that I'm fortunate to work with a number of manufacturers that come into this, our beautiful town, from all over the world. And the great thing is whenever they see the Field Park and they look around and they see the beautiful bridge and they see our river and everything else, it takes their breath away. And I look at this city and I'm proud to be a resident of this city, and I just look at this and say, it's like everybody said, this building is just wrong place, wrong place. So I hope and ask that you just reject this design.
Thank you. Thanks all three of you. Next three, please.
Are Christy Nash, sorry, I can't read the first name, Demersimich, I believe it's the last name, and Melanie Yo. And they'll be followed by David Mitchell, John Wertzler, and Roger Leachman.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Christy Nash. I live in the Pearl, and I have no financial impact from this project, but I did want to speak to a little bit of a citizen's experience living in the Pearl. I grew up in the country and did not have paved roads, and I'm just now learning to ride a bike at age 48. And how I did it was in Fields Park. I thank you for that. I rode round and round until at least I'm comfortable going on the waterfront loop that we have, at least on the east side. I always start and end at Fields Park. I get why this park is ranked number 3 for our city, behind Washington Park, and Tom McCall is our first. The dog park, the playground. I even watched the eclipse with 1,000 of my neighbors, all with that majestic bridge as the backdrop. I've learned that this bridge, that cost us $82 million, is a historically significant bridge with the second largest expanse in the world. And it's in the Library of Congress. They list it as the epitome of high tech. I think our tourism community should be celebrating and promoting this quote. The view from the Fields Park is iconic. As it was mentioned, San Francisco maintained their view corridors. We did not. My route goes north to the waterfront, where I ride on the new boardwalk with its large art sculpture, people fishing, reading books, pushing strollers, passing all the new development that does have a successful stair-step down plan and a path that is open and I can ride freely without crashing into people. As I mentioned, I'm a new bike rider. Let's not destroy this forever without consideration of what the voter and our communities want and what is right for the reputation of our city. Before you vote, I implore you to please go spend an hour in that park and look up at that bridge. Consider your children's children might someday visit it, and you might be able to say you saved that view, while remembering my words and all of our words today. In closing, it's not too late. My Santa Claus wish would be that we could reconsider and explore preserving that view corridor from the Fields Park to the bridge, but I know the reality is not that. At a minimum, please do not approve the Fremont Apartments allowances for the added height, mass, and altering the waterfront trail plan. The community is counting on your leadership. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Lorraine Demersman, and I own a condo in the Pearl District. Most of what I intended to say has already been said, but I would like to make one short statement. I agree with the opinion of the chair of the Design Commission in her conclusion that the Fremont Apartments proposed modifications negatively impact the Willamette Greenway and width. Thousands of Portlanders enjoy walking and biking the Pearl waterfront, including myself. I live blocks from the proposed site. I ask that our appeal be considered and the impact of the additional traffic and parking also be considered. It has come to my attention that there are fewer parking spaces than there are units in this proposed project, and I'm alarmed at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Melanie Yu, and I'm a resident of Goose Hollow. And I'd like to present a slightly different perspective today. Let's pretend for a moment and picture a better world where there are laws against developing buildings that would block symbolic structures like the breathtaking Fremont Bridge. And it were the developers who would have to be appealing here today to try and convince the council and mayor in a public setting that a monster building that would forever obliterate the perfect view of the bridge from Fields Park was necessary. What arguments could they possibly present that would make any sense to allow that? Instead, first of all, to be clear, I am not against tall luxury buildings per se, just against the location of this one in particular. Instead, the opposite is happening. The reality today for Portland is that beautiful public views are under constant threat by developers. Looking to make a quick profit at the expense of people who live and work here. The issue here is the same one we faced with working to protect Mount Hood and Vista Bridge views. We are talking about preserving iconic views and public space in Portland overall. And like the concerns many expressed at that time, the issues are the same. We should give precedence to preserving a public benefit rather than obliterating it forever for the economic benefit of a few. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Thanks all three of you. Next three, please.
Are David Mitchell, John Wurtzler, and Roger Leachman, and they'll be followed by Judy Duncan, John Gillette, and Brooks Hickerson.
Good afternoon, sir. Why don't you start us off?
Good afternoon. Name is Dave Mitchell. I'm a resident of the Pearl District. I serve on the board of the Pearl District Neighborhood Association, and I chair PDNA's Livability and Safety Committee. As all of you probably well know, having been to the Bay Area, one of the extraordinary assets of San Francisco is its Embarcadero, a 3-mile-long stretch of waterfront with virtually unobstructed views of San Francisco Bay other than old warehouse piers that are in the process of being renovated one by one. Chicago, Illinois has many miles of shoreline on Lake Michigan that are protected against any further high-rise development on the east side of Lakeshore Drive. My childhood hometown of Portland, Maine has taken major steps over many decades to refurbish and protect its historic port and waterfront from any high-rise buildings that might obstruct views of Casco Bay and its 365 islands. Countless cities across the country have come to realize the symbolic importance of their local rivers as vital resources that serve as a magnet for residents and visitors. Spokane, San Antonio, Pittsburgh, Minneapolis, Memphis, Cincinnati, just to name a few. In San Diego, where my wife and I lived many years before moving to Portland 9 years ago, has vowed never, ever to repeat its egregious mistake of building a wall of 3 high-rise hotels and a huge convention center right on the edge of San Diego Bay in the 1980s, obliterating views of the bay and Coronado Island unless you happen to be visiting one of the hotels or the convention center itself. Henceforth, any future development on Harbor Drive in San Diego Bay must be set back a significant distance across Harbor Drive from the bayfront to allow all to enjoy the benefits associated with a view of the bay. These examples are just a tiny sampling of American cities, most of which were major industrial centers that formerly treated their rivers or harbors as virtual sewers and as their backyard to be hidden from view. These cities have all come to realize that their rivers and bayfronts are critical assets to be preserved at all costs for all to view and enjoy. From where I sit, Portland has shown great vision in recent decades in recognizing the Willamette River as our version of San Francisco Bay or the Sacramento River. Efforts to beautify the riverfront south of Burnside and extending to the south waterfront are highly commendable and are excellent examples of what should be done with as much of our riverfront as possible. But allowing the Fremont apartments to be built as presently designed would, in my view, be a terrific blunder for a city that prides itself on enlightened urban planning. Frankly, I can't imagine how any elected or appointed public official who claims to grasp the importance of our river as a symbolic element in our city's DNA could possibly allow this giant structure to go forward as currently configured. In this particular location, it's way too massive, it's way too tall, and it's way too close to the river. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Hi, my name is John Wurtzler. I'm a Pearl District resident. I support the Pearl District Neighborhood Association's appeal of the proposed design of the Fremont Place apartment high-rise. I'm against this project for the following reasons. First, the proposed development will obstruct the view of the Fremont Bridge in Fields Park, as already been mentioned. This bridge was designed to be artistic as well as functional. It has become an iconic structure, symbolic of Portland, a city that's divided by the Willamette River, but united by its bridges. Obstructing the view by allowing a high-rise construction along the river creates a physical and visual barrier to the Willamette and isolates neighborhoods from this natural resource that is uniquely our own. Second, the developer has discounted the importance of the public greenway in order to maximize the size of the proposed building. Construction along the Willamette River should not be allowed to constrict the public right-of-way along the river like the proposed Fremont Place Apartments project does. Maintaining a public walkway of 18 to 25 feet along the river should be the starting point for any proposal, not an afterthought. Third, a proposed building has been granted excessive height and square footage bonuses based on amenities that are ill-conceived and disingenuous. The result is a building that is too massive and too tall for the lot size. It includes a restaurant with limited parking, a bike locker and shower facilities that are not likely to be used in a residential building, a walkway that pinches pedestrian and bicycle traffic to less than 13 feet, and artwork that is disguised as park benches. And fourth, the proposed building potentially sets an unfortunate design precedent for other development along the Willamette River. Future development along the river, including Centennial Mills, Albert Mills parking lot, and other sites, both north and south of the Fremont Bridge, will take their design cue from what is decided about this proposed project. Such a design precedent will create a canyon-like effect along Nadeau Parkway and Front Avenue and limit access to the river and Greenway. No doubt you've heard from many Portland residents objecting to the proposed project because it obstructs the aesthetic and iconic view of the Fremont Bridge. In closing, I'd like to suggest that the real issue to be addressed is not the view of the Fremont Bridge, but the vision for development along the Willamette River. It's not the view, it's the vision. Please consider your decision on this appeal and keep it open to all of those in connecting our neighborhoods.
Could I ask you a follow-up question? Because you raised some good issues here. So the vision is really encompassed in the base zoning.
Correct.
And the bonus system pre-exists. It factually exists. And so the question isn't for us today, should the bonus system exist, although that is something we could certainly take up at a later date. You mentioned on one of the bonus issues, and I heard somebody else say the same thing, and I was confused when I heard it once, but now that it's been said twice, I need to dig in a little deeper. There's a contention that the bike storage will not be used in a residential building. Could you explain why you believe that to be the case?
So if each of the units has, in fact, been required to have bike storage within their units, who's going to use the bike locker? Who's going to use the downstairs shower facilities? It's as I think was pointed out, is a loophole that has been exploited by the developer that is typically found in the commercial buildings in the city. In a residential building, doesn't make as much sense.
Got it. Okay, thank you for clarifying that. I appreciate that. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Roger Leachman. I'm a resident on Southwest Vista, and I serve on the board of the Goose Hollow Foothills League. I'm here to read a statement by our president, Michael Mahaffey, who could not be present. I'll preface it by saying I believe most all of us in Goose Hollow support our colleagues and neighbors in the Pearl, because for all of us, it's about neighborhoods. With apologies to Robert Frost, good neighborhoods make good cities. As others have argued more cogently than I could, this project does not advance that. It's ironic that they name this thing after the view it destroys. And now I'll read a statement by Michael. Although I am president of Goose Hollow, I write this as an individual and a professional in urban development. I'd like to note that it is unfortunate that the debate around this and other projects has been framed as being about loss of views from private homes, when what is much more important is the loss of iconic views from the public realm and the degrading of our urban commons. More deeply, I think the debate is ultimately about what kind of city we want to become. Should we be a city that surrenders its heritage in an ill-considered rush to address its short-term problems with a simplistic build, baby, build solution? Are we disturbed by the growing uglification of our city? Will we accept the premise, in spite of evidence, that we can't build more housing and preserve the very qualities that make our city so attractive in the first place? Or will we work more diligently to balance developer profits with the wider long-term interest of the city now and into the future? Will we work to ensure that new construction is easier to build, is more affordable, does not destroy existing affordable stock, does not destroy iconic views or otherwise degrade the public realm, and is as beautiful as the city around it? I think that is the ultimate question. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thanks, all three of you.
Thank you.
Next three, please.
Are John Gillette, Brooks Hickerson, and we'll go with Sally Mize. And they'll be followed by Carol Yarrow, Keith Chellam, and Lawrence W. Erickson.
Good afternoon, sir. Would you like to start?
Well, thank you very much, Your
Thank you,
Honor.
sir.
I'm Dr. John Gillette, a retired geriatric psychiatrist and a several-year resident of the Pearl District. I'm very interested in the quality of life and opposed to this building project. I previously sent you a picture of a plaque that I found while riding my bicycle on the Selwood Bridge that said City of Bridges, and then listed all of our bridges and talked specifically about the unique aspects of the Fremont Bridge. And as you've heard, some people, due to its public design being the bridge of the people. And I'm hearing all the wonderful presentations today. I'm going to limit my comments quite significantly. I did get involved in approaching people at the fields and getting signatures for the protest and this particular appeal. And 98% of the people I talked to were very interested, signed up, et cetera, and did indeed think that the particular view of the Fremont Bridge and the potential obstruction would be devastating. Likewise, as a bicycle rider, I ride on the greenways, and the proposed restrictions and the shadows and stuff with this project would involve, I think, would be very detrimental and should be avoided. Obviously, any kind of building onto greenway space will mean that it'll never be recovered and available as initially planned. As a bicycle rider and living in a condominium, the fact that they've utilized some of the space to increase the height and building area is a bit disturbing. I occasionally have to take my bike to rather than storage in the parking garage, taking it into the apartment. And I can imagine that people having to use the storage in their apartments would be carrying their bicycles up in the elevators and then scratching doors and walls, getting them into the units. Lastly, I think there's concern around well, I don't know how much of a concern, but there's, I guess, to be a restaurant in that area, which may be nice, but it seems like about location maybe not the most workable thing, and perhaps just there to change the nature of the building to allow for other modifications. I will close with saying that I am concerned about the slippery slope effect, and that other things may be forthcoming that would be further detrimental. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
My name is Brooks Hickerson, and I live close to the Fields Park. I'm there every day. I'm also a member of the PDNA, and I'm also a member of the Friends of Pearl Walking Patrol. I paint outdoors in Portland. Every day, I go outside and paint the iconic views of this beautiful city. This is one of the reasons I moved to Portland. Okay. And I'm a member of several painting organizations. In the 8 years I've lived here, I've painted hundreds and hundreds of views, and dozens of views of the bridge as well as Centennial Mills. And I oppose the Fremont apartment construction as it's currently proposed. The height proposal and the back from the river, I paint along the river all the time, will be a personal loss to me. It says you can block out these views. You see I've done it right here in this picture, and you personally are about to vote on something that's about to do this, okay? Or you can limit the development with the current limits back to what they were originally designed to be. I urge the City Council to stick with the current development limits and not grant the exceptions. I do support the appeal, and I hope you will too. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon.
Hi, I'm Sally Mize. I've lived in the Pearl for 7 years as a renter, and I am really a person that is ground level every day, all over the city, up and down, both sides, and I'm 100% walker, cyclist, and transit user. So I am out there. I call myself a boots on the ground person. I lead a foot patrol in the Pearl through the Livability Committee with which I participate, and I love my city. And I, as a whole, not just the Pearl. And as I'm around it, especially in the walkways, I think of two bridges that are icons, visual icons. One is Tillicum in all its beauty and thought of protecting all the people, and its relativity to South Waterfront, which has beautifully enhanced the riverfront by keeping low setbacks for the buildings and also adding an absolutely beautiful urban park that connects with trails that already existed for many years. So has the Pearl done that, and we're gradually trying to do that throughout Portland and beyond. But I ask you to think of that and the Tillicum Bridge as the south end icon and the Fremont Bridge as the north end icon. And I walk that at least 3 times a week. And I stopped the other day and looked back from the north end of Fremont Bridge. And if you want to preserve the whole major curve of the Fremont Bridge, look at it from there. They have done residences, completely beautiful setbacks to exactly, and ended them, the setbacks, and begun their buildings between front and the river so that the whole curve shows. So you've got an immediate north of the iconic Fremont Bridge, and you've got lots of river south of it. Let's protect it for all of us, please. And I invite you as a walker there to come down. I can show you in 30 minutes exactly the problem. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you, all 3 of you. Next 3, please.
So, Mayor, before you do that, I don't think we've ever had the privilege of somebody submitting a work of art into the record. I don't know if is he willing to part with it? I just wanted to.
I'd like a picture.
What if we just took
Okay,
a
so
picture
we're
and
good.
submitted the
Thank you.
photo? So we don't have to take his painting.
That's what we said no.
We probably can't afford it. It's quite
I
nice.
could submit the photo into the record.
Is that acceptable? If we just use
I
a
think
photograph
the
of it?
image from Commissioner Udaly, if
Okay,
she
great.
gives it to Carla, will be great. Thank you.
Awesome. Next 3, please.
I'm sorry, Carol Yarrow, Keith Tellum, and Lawrence W. Erickson are up now. And they'll be followed by Rod O'Hearley, Kevin Cosgrove, and Jeannie Coates. And we're looking for Carol Yarrow, Keith Tellum, and Lawrence Erickson now.
Yeah, there's a bit of a delay, so we can wait a minute. And Carla, if we have people in the overflow rooms, it looks like we still have some space upstairs. I don't know if they're limiting the number upstairs. Yeah, let's read 3 more names and see if we can get some folks. We'll accommodate people as they come in.
Kevin Cosgrove here. Let's come on
There's
up.
Kevin. Come on up, Kevin.
Jeannie Coates.
Very good. Hi, Jeannie.
And about Stephen Kafori. He's coming down.
Great. I see Stephen. Okay, good. Why don't you go ahead and start? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. My name is Jeannie Coates. I've lived in the Pearl for a little over 4 years, and I want you to notice I have no notes with me. I don't need to go through a litany of points because I think that my predecessors have all done a wonderful job of that, but I wanted to speak to you from the heart. I was born here in 1951 at Good Samaritan Hospital. I have lived virtually my entire life here, and I love it. I love our views, our mountains, our bridges, our waterway. All of that is very special to me. I even remember when they floated the Fremont Bridge down the river and up into place. Very special memory. So I want to call upon you to look out for what is right for the city of Portland. Use your vision, use your power. Let's get this project redirected and back on track.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Hi, my name is Kevin Cosgrove. I've lived here since 1980. Like many of the people who've testified, I came here because of the attractions of a city which has an international reputation. It also has a reputation for its planning and its care about the process to approve certain projects. I'm going to focus, having heard many of the people talk today, on the specifics of the way that this building was approved, the process that was gone through, the fact that it's been testified here today that there were certain, if you like, short circuits that would appear to have been taken in order to get this project underway. And I would ask you, each of you, as the stewards of this city's reputation, the stewards of this city's heritage, to pay close attention to the facts in the way that your attorney has pointed out, that this isn't about the emotion of people saying, where's my view of a bridge? This is about people saying, not only where's my view of a bridge, but how did that apartment building get to the point where it could be approved in the way that it has been? So, in my opinion, you, and the man on the phone have an enormous amount of history to look at and an enormous amount of legacy to take into account.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. My name is Stephen Kafori. I do live in the Pearl, but I live in the southern portion, and as my view is to the south, I have no individual interest in this appeal. However, as a citizen of the city, I have a huge interest in the outcome. For decades, I have been involved with and supportive of the planning process that has made this one of the most livable cities in the world. This proposal flies in the face of all that planning. I agree, along with the citizens here today, that although height and density are desirable, we all live in high-rise buildings, and many of us in the Pearl, after all. This project is the wrong size in the wrong place. This city made a huge mistake on the east end of the Burnside Bridge, allowing what one commissioner has called an eyesore. Please don't make another one on the other side of the river.
Thank you. Thanks, all three of you.
Thank you.
Next three, please, Carla.
Was there a Lawrence Erickson? Okay. Then the next three will be Jeffrey Cash, Jill Rizzi, and Claudia Cosgrove. Okay.
Why don't you go ahead and start, sir?
I'm Jeffrey Cash. I'm a resident of the Pearl, and I want to speak again. I mean, people have said most of what I want to say, so I just want to recognize a couple of points. I want to specifically point out that the developer received a variance, and that's what we're really at the issue of what we're talking about today is whether those variances should have properly been granted to build a building that, in particular, that I want to talk about is the encroachment on the Greenway. You know, in some places it's as narrow as 13 feet now and 25 feet maximum, and the developer was essentially given 30 feet to develop, which belonged to the public. And I simply look at the plans for future development in Portland, which I generally support, and I know that we're going to see more and more people in the urban core of Portland, more and more people living there, more and more people coming in for the afternoon or the evening. We need more parkland. Why should we give a variance to a developer that gives away parkland that we already own? You know, many years ago, I think someone else mentioned it, the Tom McCall Park was wharves and all kinds of things, and then a road or a freeway was going to be put through there, and people had the foresight to say, no, that land is far too valuable for those uses. We need to hold it for the public. Why would we give away other land in an area that we know we're going to be having more people in? So that's my question, and I might want to comment, and I want to thank you for your attention to all the people who came today. Thank you.
Very good, and just one interesting historical point. The city actually went farther than that. It was the Harbor Freeway, and we reclaimed that as a green space. That's not part of this hearing, but just as an historical point of note.
Thank you.
Next three, Carla.
Okay. Are Jerry Mars, Christian Maynard, and John Hollister.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon. My name is Jerry Mars. I live in the Pearl, and I just have a few things to say. The Fremont Apartments is asking for modifications to their building, with two being significant deviations to the building structure. Those are encroaching on a 45-degree river setback that was mentioned earlier, and also increasing the depth of their building from 200 feet to over 230 feet. So a 5-story building is going to tower within a couple feet of the Greenway to build a restaurant. When did we start trading off our green space along the riverfront for restaurants? I have not heard a valid reason why these modifications make this a better project. And also, the Fremont Apartments will be the first in 3 building sites to be developed on the Pearl waterfront since Waterfront Pearl. The Fremont Apartments will set the stage for this redevelopment and therefore needs to follow city regulations, which are based upon a joint neighborhood, landowner, and city land use planning effort. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I'm Christian Maynard Phillip. I'll keep this short and sweet.
Can you get just a little closer to you?
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
You can move it towards you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's good. Thank you, Christian.
My name is Christian Maynard Phillip. I work and I'm a homeowner, in the Pearl. I'm also the Pearl District Neighborhood Association treasurer. I speak on behalf of myself, not on behalf of the PDNA. I am here to represent the next generation of Portlanders that will make their homes and build their businesses in the Pearl. I urge you to carefully consider our very legitimate grievances as well as the legacy of this decision.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Good afternoon.
Hi, my name's John Hollister, and the plan was to have us be a team, like a 9-minute team. So I wanted to, they both used less than a minute and a half each. So I'm asking a little too late, I think. But I ain't gonna make a.
If we adopted that rule,
Yeah, no.
we'd be having people speak forever, and our rule is 3 minutes per person.
That makes sense. I understand. Okay, here we go. My name is John Hollister, PDN board member, Planning and Transportation Committee, but today I'm speaking as an individual. I met all of you last March 29th, the day of the famous lockdown, and then met you again on June 14th, and at the Pearl East appeal. And Mayor, you said, as you said today, that your decisions today are constrained and approval criteria and in their interpretation. And you also were concerned why I was alone. I'm not alone today. Okay, so how do I get slide 1 going? Okay, the design commission's been busy, and and there's I have tremendous respect for these volunteers, and there's just so much work. There's no way they can spend as much time on every issue as someone like me might on a single issue. So I think that they've done a good job, but there's just too much to cover, and I think the same thing for staff. I think Ben has done a wonderful job as well. Okay, as it's been said here, this building is much more than about the view, but the view is pretty iconic. I am the only one that testified about the view corridor. This is not about the view corridor today, but you can see that with proper notification or with better communication from me, we would have had more people talking about that. I'm going to go through these very quickly. How do you correct a problem? How do you correct a mistake once it's been made? Here is a aerial where for orientation, it's somewhat in the middle there is the parking lot where the project is going to be going, and to the far right are the 2 towers of Waterfront Pearl. The rest of my presentation, 41 seconds, will focus on the precedents mentioned. The precedents referred to simply don't match up. The Waterfront Pearl, this is a water feature. The water feature in this proposed project is, and I read it again today, it is a storm drain and the Willamette. Here are some pictures of the different view corridors with the openness of the Pearl, or of the waterfront. Bridgetown Labs, this is a greenway, 50-foot greenway. They got extra feet, but it's a 50-foot greenway, not 25. So this is the view there. And when you take all these into consideration, the amenities that were given for those extra types of things are very significant. And when all of them just went for one of the major ones, these went for both, and another and another. I'm in sales, and if I can get in 7 things, I'll get 7 things, and I'll almost think that I didn't ask for enough. But that's what they did, and I'm done.
Thank you, appreciate it. Thank you, all 3 of you. Next 3, please.
I believe that was all who was on the list. Did anybody sign up who didn't hear their name? Okay.
So Mayor, while we're bringing other people forward, can I ask legal counsel a question?
Just come on up if you signed up and you didn't hear your name.
If you've signed up, please come on up. Please come on up. Thank you. Sure, Commissioner Fish.
So I want to ask our counsel a question. You know, a number of months ago, we took up a major reform effort around boards and commissions. And one of the components of that effort was we wanted to encourage minority reports and some mechanism for minority reports to come to council. So we get the benefit of split decisions. We've had a number of people testify today that Julie Livingston, the chair of design review, was in the minority in a decision below, has perhaps authored some opinion on this project, but it's not part of the materials that are in my packet. So I guess I have two questions. One is, what is the normal procedure for us to have the benefit of a dissenting opinion if someone presents it? And how does that information come to us? Because it's a little odd to have it filtered through people testifying in favor of the appeal. With all due respect, it's not the equivalent of actually having the report that Julie has apparently authored. So what are your thoughts on that?
So first of all, generally speaking, I won't give you a legal opinion on first impression in a large public setting because I haven't had a chance to think through this, and I've not been the one primarily involved in the boards and commissions, but it's my understanding that that is in the process of implementation, so I don't suspect that the Design Commission has had the opportunity to address that issue, whether they, I mean, I know there are boards and commissions I have worked with, for example, the Charter Commission that decided to provide both the majority and minority opinions on things, but I don't know that they've had the opportunity to consider that yet.
So is it your view, though, conceptually, that any written opinion by a commission member is part of the record before us?
Not unless it's placed before and not rejected by this body. The record consists of what's put in the record, and I'm not, I just honestly don't know whether
So if that's not put in the record, it's not technically before. So right. the other option.
There's nothing, and I don't think there's necessarily anything that would prevent it from being placed in the record. I'm just not aware that there is such a thing.
Okay, and I guess the other issue is we frequently have hearings where members of the Design Commission testify. And nothing prevents a dissenting member of the Design Commission from coming to testify, does it?
I believe they have recently adopted new bylaws. I don't know that there's anything in there that speaks to that. I mean, there's nothing in our code that would prevent them from doing so, but I don't know whether there's anything in their bylaws that speaks to it again.
Mayor, the reason I raise this obviously is that by the time something comes to us and it's already had a hearing and a robust debate, I mean, I have always found it very useful to understand the thinking of the Design Review Commission. We have very thoughtful appointees who put a lot of time and energy, and it is fairly unusual to be told that the chair dissents on an issue. That I can't think of the last time that was a fact before us. And if someone in the minority chose to write a report, it may or may not influence my thinking on the subject, but it would seem to me to be useful to have access to that so I could have the benefit of their thinking. And when people are testifying about someone's dissent, I'd actually, with all due respect, rather read the words of the person who wrote it and make my own judgment than hear secondhand. So I don't know how to address that, but because I don't think this has come up before.
So I was just thinking, and staff came up and had the same thought, which is that when just as here, when you vote and it's not a unanimous decision, you all have the opportunity to say what you're thinking and why you're voting the way you are. The Design Commission does the same. One thing that is in the record are both the minutes and the tapes from the Design Review Commission's decision, and that is in the record, and you have the opportunity to review that as a part of your decision-making here, and staff can make that available to you.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful.
Good. Thank you. Last two people, thank you for your patience. Would you like to start, please?
I'm Sherry Green. I live in the Pearl. I've lived in the Pearl since 1994, so I'm an old timer. And the one word I would like to speak about today is precedent. When I bought my house, I live on Irving, and everything behind me was just totally empty. I could see all the way to there was nothing in the Pearl. And I knew that being a wonderful place that it was going to get developed. But I called the Planning Commission and I said, I'm just curious as to what else you have planned. And I was told very succinctly that there was going to be a 4-story limit of buildings in the Pearl. Now this is 1994. I'm not really good at math, but I can sure count more than 4, I'll tell you that. And my concern is that if this project passes as it is, it's setting a precedent. And it's a precedent I don't think we want to have. That's the only thing I have to say. Thank you.
Well said, thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Rod O'Hearn. I've lived in the Portland metropolitan area for the last 5 decades.
Woo.
Thanks for the opportunity to voice our opinion. I agree with the chairman's decision on the negative impact that this will have on the Greenway. Not only do we enjoy the splendor that this particular area provides, the views, the walking paths, the bike paths, but all of our relatives that come into town, the people that we ask to come visit us, this is where we bring them, not only to the restaurants, to the different entities that our Portland provides, but the river. It's huge. Also, we spend a lot of time on the water, kayaking, boating, rowing. I wish I would have made a picture of what it would look like from the water and the skyline. The reason myself and my gal live in this area is because the community, it's the people. They're kind, they're considerate, they're connected, and they care. I can fully understand why the developer sought for these modifications. There literally are millions of reasons why. Typically, I'll start with a $ and end with a decimal point. Few people will actually benefit by this. The wealthy investors, the owners, and contractors for a short period of time. There's millions of reasons why. There's also millions of reasons why not. That's the people that live in Portland, the Portlanders, the people who enjoy this city. Every person that elected you to become the good stewards of our property and our environment. You are the caretakers of our community. Just like the caretakers from the past, the elected officials who designed the codes that are now in place. There's reason for those codes. It's to protect against the few. Now, we understand that we can't change progress or the condos or the development, but the so-called modifications, it's a very gentle word for what's happening, especially for such a dramatic impact to our city and the environment. So, we would urge you to be good stewards with our riverfront properties. We would urge you to be the elected officials and to make the right decisions for our community. Allowing the modifications is not being a good steward for us and our property and the community. It's likely that the day will come in your future when you're not in politics and you're walking along the riverfront and you will say to yourselves, with your kids or your grandkids, I made a choice. I made a good decision. We all, our community, will be better off without the modifications. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both. Thanks for your patience. Very good. Next, we will hear from the principal opponent. If my memory serves correctly, you have 17 minutes and 4 seconds. Name for the record, please. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Allison Reynolds with Perkins Coie, and we are land use counsel for the applicant, Lincoln Property Company. And today I've got with me Patrick Gilligan, who is with Lincoln Property Company, and after I'm done with this, he'll talk a little bit about Lincoln's investment in the city and this project specifically. And then also with me at the end of the table is Tim Wybanga with TVA Architects. And Tim has been the principal architect of this project and has really been sort of working with the neighborhood and and the Design Commission on all the various changes that took place over about a year-and-a-half period to try to bring this project to what it is today, which we think is something that provides a lot of public benefit and a great design for the site. But my job here, I guess, is to talk a little bit about a couple of the legal issues that were highlighted by the appellants. And I won't go into a huge amount of depth with these today, but we did submit a written argument to you a couple of days ago that I hope you guys have. And if you have any additional questions, we're, of course, happy to answer those. So the first issue, I think, is one that you've heard a number of testifiers talk about today, and that is the floor area ratio calculation for the site. And so, as you probably know, under the development code, you have basically a size of a property, and then that gets multiplied by a number, and that equates to the amount of floor area that you can build in a building. And that, of course, has to, if you have a design overlay like this property does, go through discretionary design review. So just because you have it doesn't mean you can build it, but it does actually give you sort of a legal limit for how big the building can be. And so the first question about that was raised as to whether or not, for calculating that size of the underlying property, the greenway setback and public plaza areas should be contained as part of the site or excluded. And opponents of the project cited a code section that is actually not part of the code that governs this project. And so, as you guys know, the code can change from the date of application to when you all actually are seeing this in an appeal setting. And so this project was submitted in November of 2016, and the code section that was referenced is actually something that was adopted on March 31, 2017. And so that reference is something that you should just be aware does not actually apply here. And the code in effect at the time is clear that an ownership is what encompasses that site, and things like easements for the greenway or a public plaza that you provide on your site do not deduct from that total square footage. The second issue is one that is really in the legal weeds, and I will try to simplify this, but the question of exactly how far toward the river the site actually physically stretches. And opponents are correct that back in actually the 1800s, there was a determination by the Oregon legislature of where the state actually owns versus where private parties own. But there was actually a 4-year period during which legislation dedicated that back to private property owners. And if you perfected your deed to your site during that time, you actually then own that little sliver between the ordinary low and the ordinary high. And that is the case for this property. We had discussed this at length with staff, and it was a big part of our due diligence because we do not want these folks to design a building that cannot actually be built on their site. And so we actually would like you to leave the record open until Friday so we can submit all of this material. We had discussed it with staff, and I believe they have it, but I don't actually think it's part of the formal record. And we, of course, want you to have the benefit of that for this appeal.
Could you stop the clock for a second?
Yeah.
I want to ask you a question.
Sure.
So, could you go a few sentences deeper on that? So there was some time period by which the state granted property owners the ability to go all the way to the, I would assume, the low tide line, is that correct?
Yep. And so it was.
How long did that time period last, and when was that time period?
So that was between 1874, when the legislature enacted legislation, which essentially deeded the submerged lands that are between ordinary high and ordinary low to the owners of the adjacent upland. And then they repealed that legislation in 1878. And so it is during that 4-year period in the 1800s, if you actually perfected the deed to your property, you were governed under the law that was in effect and then was repealed.
So your contention, and you say you have the documents to back this, and I'll just trust you on this for the time being. So your contention is during that period between 1874 and 1878, whoever owned the land did in fact perfect the deed.
They did.
And that has been passed on?
Yep. And it has never been carved out.
Change.
Yes, exactly. To eventually when Lincoln Property Company became the owner of the site.
All right, thank you. You can start the clock again. I was just curious on that.
No worries. So that is all I will say on that issue, but just know that it was fully vetted by our team, and we will provide those documents to you. The other two quick legal issues, first the locker room floor area ratio bonus. The code is clear that if you are in an EX or CX zoned site in the city and you meet the various requirements of that, for a mixed use building, a residential building, a commercial building, you are allowed to have a locker room and get a bonus for that for FAR. And we should just note too that we have one shower for male use and one for female use. We just kind of provided two, and then we have a few lockers associated with that, but it's no bigger than that. And so we feel that if restaurant employees or other employees of the building were to bike to work, that would probably be the primary users of those rather than folks that are actually in the units. But they would be available to anyone who used the building.
Could you stop the clock again? So the contention was made during testimony that, and I may have misheard the individual, so I apologize if I did, that you are required to store your bike in your apartment, or did I just mishear that?
I believe you, I don't know actually if you misheard it or not, but as far as what the code requires, the building is required to provide a certain number of long-term bicycle parking spaces, and those can be provided in your unit or in a sort of common area. And so this project actually provides one bicycle storage, I guess it's a rack that goes in the unit per unit, and then we will also have an additional bicycle storage area with places for more spaces. Okay. And the code actually requires more spaces than could fit in one per unit, so we're giving more than that.
Okay, very good.
So just to be clear, your view is that under our code that applies, your client is entitled to 175 feet?
For height?
For height.
So there is a modification that you can get under the code that would allow the Design Commission, by finding that a height of 175 feet on this property better meets the design guidelines and is consistent with the purpose of the standard height here to be modified to grant that height. And I don't want to put words in the Design Commission's mouth, and I know that Tim can probably speak better to how that occurred, but that was the finding, that essentially a building with a podium and a tower that kind of swept sort of on one side of the bridge better met those guidelines than a 100-foot building would have been able to.
Okay, so it's not an entitlement, it's a discretionary action. Yes. And so we got a lot of testimony about the impact on the Greenway. So how would this project be different if we preserved a 25-foot Greenway?
So that's actually something that we also discuss in length in the legal submission that I sent in, and I think this staff also talked about this too. But just to make clear, there is a 25-foot setback from, I believe it's here, a seawall on this property that encompasses the Greenway. Our project actually then sets back, I believe, another approximately 3.5 feet from that to the closest point of the project to that Greenway. So we are preserving not only that required 25-foot Greenway setback, but then an additional setback. The setback that is being modified for this particular property is actually an angle where once you have achieved 35 feet in height next to the Greenway, you are supposed to step back 1 foot for every foot up you go. And so it essentially creates this 45-degree angle back from the Greenway that your building elevation is supposed to meet. And this building is requiring a modification to that to allow essentially the building to kind of encroach into that little angle area.
But that step back would not address the concerns people have raised about the view from the north. Excuse me, from the south, from the southeast. That would affect the look of the building from the river and the step back.
So the modification is to that standard, the Greenway step back for the North Pearl, and I believe the reason that was actually done was to allow the building to have the orientation that it does in order to preserve those views. So it kind of works in context with the other modifications in order to place the building where it is and preserve the view that is being preserved.
And let me, since we have a lawyer here advocating for one side, let me ask you the question that I asked the other side, which is, in a transitional neighborhood where we know that many of the parcels are going to be redeveloped, what is the appropriate definition of context?
And I mean, I think that is almost a harder question for a lawyer to ask than for a design professional. But here, I believe that we were thinking of context in sort of the developing nature of the North Pearl neighborhood, and not just looking at the buildings that are next to us, because these are not buildings that are, I have no idea when they will actually redevelop, but it seems likely that they will redevelop in the future. And so part of the context, I think, is sort of that the neighborhood, it has come all the way up to NATO. And so making sure that we are integrating with both the things that are around, the way the river integrates with the project, and the other developments that are kind of part of the North Pearl, but separated from this by NATO.
Okay, thank you.
All right. I think that's probably good for me. You've heard too much from the lawyer for a design review proposal. So I'm going to turn this over.
Can I ask one question before you?
Yes.
Commissioner Saltzman.
So you said the site development or the site area calculation was changed in March 31st of 2017?
Not really. It's just that there is a code section that was added to the measurement section that is being relied upon by appellants when they make the argument that those areas should be taken out of the site. We actually would argue that under the code today and the code when this project was actually submitted, that both of those support our interpretation. But we were just pointing out that the argument is being made based on that code section, and that is not something that the council is able to consider because that is not a code regulation that applies to this project.
And you're saying so it was a code interpretation in March of 2017?
It was actually through one of your code changes, the recap process. I believe it was recap 8, and that added a number of different sections to the zoning code. And so it was during that point that was added to the code. So it's a new code section completely. It does not exist in the code that's in effect for the application date of this project.
Okay, so in your opinion, then, the current definition of site area should include the esplanade to the north and the greenway section to the east?
Yes, in our opinion, the definition of site is an ownership, and the property owner here, Lincoln, owns both the area that has a greenway easement on it and the plaza area that was in question.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So with that, I will turn it over to Patrick Gilligan with Lincoln Property Company to tell you a little bit about his role, and then we'll move on to Tim Waibenga with TVA Architects. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Allison. Mayor and Commissioners, thanks for your time today. So developer of the project just gets to qualm a few rumors here. I'm a Portland resident, live 5 blocks away. I office across the street, oversee local staff, about 25 people, and I'm responsible for roughly 50 buildings representing 4.5 million square feet in the Portland metro area. So I'm definitely here. This is home. This has been a really big project for us. We spent a lot of time. We set a goal of being transparent, working with staff, working with the design commissioners. And it's been a long battle, but we're really excited with the way it's come out and the design we have today, and are excited to hopefully keep moving it forward. Other projects that we work on here and there, Wells Fargo Center, PacWest Center, again, this is home for us. So we're very committed to Portland and making the city a better place as much as we can through our projects. So thank you for your time, and I'll turn it over to Tim.
Excellent. Tim Waibenga with TVA Architects. As Allison said, I've been part of this project from the outset, and I'm going to kind of try and quickly go through a year and a half worth of process in the next 7 or 8 minutes, and then there are some pieces of information that are in the back of the printed packet and on the slides here that are really graphic illustrations that help represent some of the points that were made in public testimony. So if you have any specific questions, obviously we'll be happy to come back to those. First thing in general is just looking at the site. So this is a surface parking lot, right? So this is not a park. It's sort of an anomaly on the waterfront that we have 2 low-scale sort of suburban-style office buildings and a large surface parking lot. So in the essence of the site, not to revisit this too often, but these diagrams that you've seen in other contexts really describe that the difference between, we've tried to be very clear about the difference between the allowable base height, base floor area, and those pieces that are available to us through bonus and through modification. This just kind of gives a general look at that. From this general understanding of the allowable scale and volume of this, we did several studies and many studies. These diagrams show what's important about this. We've said from the outset, it's been quite clear, there is no protected view from Fields Park. There is no protected view really anywhere pertinent to this site. However, we recognize that what a lot of these people said at the outset and through the testimony is correct. This is an important part of Portland, and so from the beginning we've said, let's see what we can do from a good neighbor standpoint from day one of this project to mitigate this without the requirement to do so. And so what you see in these studies, and you'll see throughout here, is that we took that view from Fields Park as being important and have studied the mass of the building. And so what's happened through the process is we've actually moved mass out of the podium, which would have more of a negative effect on that view, and pulled it towards the tower. And there's a few more things that we can kind of go through. This diagram is one that you may have seen previously, so and Ben put it in his presentation. This describes the project by right, which is the 100-foot red-orange block. And it describes, you can kind of see where where we've moved volume out of that building into the tower element to increase the visibility of the bridge. And again, this is from one specific vantage point. As you know, just about every building in the Pearl and downtown obscures the bridge in some way. So most of our relationship with the bridge isn't a complete span of the arch until you get to the waterfront, and we'll kind of get to that as well. In terms of the process, and there's been a lot of, I think, mistruths being told in terms of the way this might have been pushed through or something else. We've met with the Pearl District Neighborhood Association, myself and my colleagues, 4 times for 2 or 2.5 hours each time, talking through the minutia of the project and the big vision as well. There's me presenting that same view diagram to the committee. So we've spent a lot of time on this with the neighbors, and did so not as a requirement because we wanted the neighbors to be on board and we wanted to get that input. Similarly, there's no shortage of public process besides pre-apps, and we've had a design advice review hearing, and we've had 4 public hearings. So no shortage of opportunity for public comment, and no shortage of iterations to go back and forth with the Design Commission. To that point, this next plan is actually the site plan as it existed at the time of our DAR. So there are some substantial changes here in the next couple slides that have to deal with our interaction with the Design Commission and also with the neighborhood. First and foremost is that in this plan we had really a combined pedestrian auto court on the north side of this building to try and get resident vehicles into the building. And then to the east of that was essentially a lawn area. Secondly, the other thing that you'll see here is the Greenway Trail itself. So that represents the existing condition of the Greenway Trail, which at the time we were intending to leave. Another thing that came up, and I'll go through so this is where we ended up through the process. So what was a 10-foot public access to the river, combining cars and pedestrians, is now a 60-foot wide major public space designed as a multi-use space to bring residents of the Pearl to the river and to bring activity to the river. Similarly, through our interaction specifically with the PDNA, we went back on the plan of leaving the existing greenway condition, partly because it's not particularly friendly. And one of the primary things we got out of one of those meetings was the existing trees are riverward of the greenway. So the trees themselves become an obstruction. So in redesigning this, we've tried to design something that will increase public amenity.
Can you keep this slide on for a second? So there's been a lot of comparisons to Riverfront Pearl. And I ride my bike through Riverfront Pearl a lot. Can you explain to us how bikes and pedestrians are meant to navigate this particular greenway?
I can, and I also have another exhibit at the end that kind of describes the section. What I can tell you is that the existing greenway right? The greenway is 25 feet wide as an easement. It's required to be a combination of plantings and hardscape. The existing hardscape at the narrow points between the tree well and the edge of walk is 12.5 feet. So that entire stretch, which you've probably run or ridden your bike, about 1,100 feet here between this parcel and the Fremont Bridge is to that same standard. So what we've done here is try to acknowledge the fact that we have a 13-foot minimum width, which we have gone through an iterative process with parks and with the neighborhood to get to that number, and a 18-foot average width. So 13 feet is at the pinch point. And part of what we're trying to do here, the greenway ends here currently. And so what we're trying to do from an urban planning and a design perspective is to provide something that deals with the fact that this is a transitional space, that for the time being, you know, a 25-foot wide sidewalk that goes and cuts off at the end, at the current end at the south side, essentially is one of those freeway off-ramps that never went anywhere, right? And so what we've tried to do instead is to say, design something that is, has a better experience for pedestrians and for the neighbors. Does that answer the question?
Yeah.
So, and again, here's that existing condition. So the greenway itself, no eyes on it. It's adjacent to the surface parking lot, and the greenway trails ends there at the upper left of the site. So our proposal, and again, there's been a lot of talk about cutting off the river or not providing access to the river. I think this image essentially shows what we've come to through this process, which is a substantial 60-foot wide public space that directly links people from Nadeau Parkway and eventually to the Pearl to the river frontage, and an augmented design for the greenway itself that provides spaces for people to sit, congregate. It acknowledges the sort of temporary condition where the greenway is not improved to the south. Sorry, this view is from the northeast. You can see the existing building there. So a lot of this stuff was developed over several meetings with the neighborhood and through several meetings, obviously, with the Design Commission. But we feel we're providing a huge public amenity. And again, if you compare this to any other project in the Pearl, sitting on a 200 by 200 block, there are generally zero public amenities. So there really has been a lot that's been provided here that's intended for that public benefit in order to justify some of the things that we've requested. Another thing in terms of the site plan that's really key, you can see, someone mentioned earlier, this building and Nadeau Parkway are at a shift from the Pearl District grid of a little over 40 degrees. What that means is, I lost my page. What that means is we actually used this L-shaped tower, which the Design Commission gave us a lot of trouble about. Why is it an L? And the reason is it minimizes the sight lines. And so what you can see there, if you look at the length, top to bottom in this plan, that's the length extension. And the reason we requested that specific length is it doesn't change the vantage point from Fields Park. So we were able to put some of that volume in the building in a place that takes into consideration the very viewpoint that people are so concerned about. And then I guess I would offer this one to show the context. What you can see here is this is a building in and of the Pearl. The tower element itself, in terms of the question of context, this tower belongs in the Pearl. Most of the towers in the Pearl are substantially larger than this. In terms of stepping down to the river, you can see that through our process with the Design Commission, it substantially steps down to the river. In terms of its context with adjacent buildings, it has the same relationship to the greenway and to the river as the existing adjacent facilities.
So could you stop the clock for a second? So there's been a lot of discussion about this notion of context. Right. What does it mean to you as an architect? As you're looking at this building, and I heard what you just said in terms of the size of the other building. What does it mean?
It is when these questions come up, I always remember what my dad said to me when he told me not to go into architecture school, which is that I was leaving engineering where facts were quantifiable into a field where everybody got an opinion. And it's true, right? This is all highly subjective. And so what I would say in terms of context is not the same as what someone else would say. What we've tried to do here is to balance context in terms of both the fact that this is sitting in the largest, most highly developed residential neighborhood in the city, and it sits on the waterfront. So the scale cues and the material cues of these podium elements are taken directly from the flour mill at Centennial Mill. They're taken from Albers Mill. That's the scale, that's sort of the repetition of these masonry elements that ties into, if you picture Albers Mill, you picture the flour building at Centennial Mill, there's a regularity and a repetition. And we've tried to nest those two things together and acknowledge that the context of this building is actually certainly of two or many more minds. And we've tried to meld both the modernity of the towers in the Pearl together with something that is contextual in its texture, scale, and placement.
Thank you.
So I'll keep going through here. Just in general, and you can look at these things in your packet. These are all the public amenities we're talking about. This was designed in conversation with the Design Commission. They really wanted something more. And that was the same we heard from the PDNA. Yeah, okay, this is good. We want something more. We want something extra. And what we got to, in addition to the 60-foot wide plaza space, was the idea of kind of creating this head condition at the intersection of the Greenway and this new plaza. It's a space where people can come, congregate, potentially use it as an amphitheater, a spot for a lecture, or just to sit and enjoy the view and the river, and the bridge, of course.
Can I ask you a question about
Sure.
this public plaza? Whose responsibility is the management of this plaza?
Unfortunately,
That's us as owners, developer.
I'm sorry?
It's a developer. It's still our property.
So you're
within
responsible for keeping it clean, security, and
Yeah,
all that?
and we've been doing it on that site for a long time now, since we've owned it.
Very good, thank you.
I laughed because that's been a point of contention between Patrick and me. The more evolved the public spaces get, the more his team has to manage over time.
Understood. Thank you.
So, okay, I'll continue on here. This view actually shows what is currently the terminus of the Greenway. And so this is an area where the Greenway expands by another 15 or 16 feet over the required amount. And the idea is we're trying to create something here that at the time, its current time is a terminus of that Greenway from north to south. But it's something that kind of becomes a knuckle or a joint for the future development. So it becomes a pause point in the future. These are all sort of just urban design concepts. The other thing that's come out of our conversations with the PDNA and with the Design Commission is we've actually gone and incorporated some units, so direct eyes on the Greenway. So we're thinking these are probably short stay units. At the outset of the project, for very practical reasons of this sort of being the end of the run, we had mechanical space there. That wasn't okay with the PDNA. It probably wasn't the best decision from an urban design perspective, so we've gone around in detail to kind of create something that's a little more energetic. And of course, one thing we haven't talked much about, I guess, is what's shown here in the center of this image. We do think it's important that there are places for people to get out on the river. We think it's important that there are different types of activities on the river. So this dining space, which the owner has encouraged us to do to help activate riverfront, to get more eyes on the Greenway, to get more people to the water, is something that we incorporated after our first couple hearings with the city, and we think it adds a real vibrancy, a real livability component to this project.
Is there an existing condition of approval that requires the public space be open to the public 24/7?
Do you know that?
I believe this is just out of the code, and so there is no condition of approval that's associated with that, but I believe that was the intention. Because it is a public plaza, it will not be in any way confined from the public, that it be open at all times.
So we've clarified that in prior decisions in 2 instances where
Okay.
we've had that representation made in the record, and if necessary, made it as a condition of approval. But
okay.
It's your understanding that the code requires it be open 24/7?
I am not, I don't want to speak to something and be incorrect, and so I don't actually know the answer to that, but I believe that is our intention, and so if that was something that isn't in the code that you guys do want clarified, then we would be, I believe, able to accept a condition.
Yeah, Allison, I believe the current, there is an easement on the Greenway right now that they're on the other part of the property, and it's, I think, and again, across other points on the Greenway, that it's, I think, 5 a.m. to 10 p.m., the hours of use. That's just the signage that we've seen in that area so far.
Yeah, and I believe that's specific to the Greenway versus this actual public plaza area, but yeah.
the public plaza purports to be a public amenity, and the land is used to calculate the extra height. So I think it's a relevant question about whether there are any restrictions placed
Sure.
on the public access to that site.
Yes, and we would be happy to look into that and get back to you. For your question, I believe we would be acceptable, or a condition of that nature would be acceptable if it's not already required by the code. So either way, we're happy to provide that as a 24-hour amenity if needed.
Excellent. So I will try to leave a little bit of time here. We have plenty of things here. If you want to talk about context, you want to ask us any more specific questions, we can kind of go through this at the end. These just give a general idea of what's most been evolved in this building over the course of all those meetings with the PDNA and all those meetings with the Design Commission is a focus on the human-scaled public access pieces. And that's hopefully evident through what we've done here, and we've spent a lot of time on it. We believe this is a huge amenity for the area, and we really believe this is the right building for the right space. And so I'll leave it there. If you have any questions on any of the specific appeal issues, I can try and flip through
I have
those.
a couple of questions. So with regard to the greenway, the width of the greenway walk, it is your contention there is no encroachment?
Absolutely not. And I should have addressed that. I actually understand, having sat through even the most recent neighborhood meeting to try and listen in and see what the issues are, I understand why people are really upset, because this has been conveyed that the city has given city property, public property, park property to a developer, which is not the case. There's a 25-foot greenway. There's still a 25-foot greenway. We don't encroach on that width at all. In fact, it's slightly bigger in numerous places. And the width constriction issue that we dealt with most substantially with the Neighborhood Planning and Transportation Committee was the question of how wide is the actual walking surface. One of the appellants mentioned the Parks District. Well, the Parks District has requirements for this space, which include landscape standards, right? So it's not acceptable to build a 25-foot wide sidewalk, besides the fact that it's not particularly appealing. So we've really tried to work, as we have with the mass of the building, to kind of control the movement of people and to create a space that's beautiful and appealing, whether or not there are people in it or it's completely packed. So that's where that width question, the only valid width question I think comes from, is 13 feet too narrow? When we first went to the neighborhood, we had a 10-foot section, which we thought was again, this is not the greenway, it's the paved portion of the greenway. It's always been 25 feet. So the question is, where we have landscape areas and it necks down, what's the right number? And we settled on 13, which is wider than most of what exists there today.
So somebody gave a very reasoned argument around the exaggeration of the buildable site, and I think it was proffered that you have exaggerated by 70% the buildable. What is your reaction to that?
That's actually, but I presume what they're saying is germane to what Allison addressed earlier, which is that the contention is that the site area, to get to that number, and I'm not sure how they would get to that number, but it means you'd have to take any part of the site that the public can use and subtract it out of the owned area of the site. So the entire public amenity of that plaza would be taken out, the greenway would be taken out, any other property that doesn't have a building on it. I think the contention is that that's not buildable area and doesn't count towards the site. I think that's what we understand the case they're making, but that certainly isn't the way this has been interpreted in any other project we've ever been a part of.
Very good.
Mayor, can I jump in for a second?
Please, Commissioner Fish.
I understand that one of the three bases for your bonus height is an eco roof.
Yes.
And is it? My assumption is that the standard for the eco roof is not the current standard that the Commissioner Udaley has put into 2035, but is the pre-existing standard.
I would say yes.
So we've substantially tightened the requirement to expand the footprint, and I assume you're using the old standard for the eco roof.
Yeah, that's correct, based on the code that's applicable to this project. So it would be the 2016 code.
I'm looking at page 21 of this beautiful handout you gave us. And can you tell me off of that picture what actually constitutes the green roof, and what is the kind of large rectangular space on the short portion of the building?
Sure. I should say our team member who did these beautiful images is sitting here, and he's probably panicking because these would fall into the artist's rendition more than precise drawings. But they're based on our model, so they're actually quite close. What's shown there very diagrammatically, the green space on top of that lowest podium, everything shown in green, it's actually a breakdown. Some of that actually fits the definition. It's all planted, but some of it doesn't fit the definition of green roof per the code. The tan-colored space is a terrace. And so there's actually another terrace that kind of wraps around. You can see a little bit of it here on the shoulder on the southeast corner. There's kind of a split between occupied terrace and green roof. What we elected to do with the green roof is to not put it in places where it wouldn't grow or wouldn't be seen, like in the mechanical well at the top of the building. So we've tried to mix that in with landscaping and with spaces that can be occupied.
Okay, thank you.
Very good. Commissioner Saltzman, anything else before we move to the next group?
I was just curious, is this building going to meet a particular LEED standard?
There's no LEED certification plan for this building.
Commissioner Fish, I just did a quick search of the code, and I don't believe that the plaza has any sort of requirement regarding 24-hour access. So if that is a condition of approval that you would like to add to this, we are happy to craft one of those for you if that would be helpful.
Get to that later. Thank you.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
So I try to keep all of my comments germane to the hearing and to the parameters of the hearing. So I will just say this. I hope you will reconsider that LEED standard. If for no other reason than I think that's what the market is looking for.
Right.
But I realize that's not necessarily germane to this particular hearing. Rebuttal. No, wait. Opponents of the appeal, 3 minutes each. How many people do we have signed up?
We have 5 people.
Very good. You can cool your heels for a little bit and think about your desire for LEED certification.
Thank you, Commissioners. Thank you.
First 3 are Madeline Kovacs, Alan Kessler, and Patricia Gardner.
No, I agree with you. Yeah. Yeah, I think we should do that. Are you all ready to go?
Okay.
Great.
Okay.
3 minutes.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, Commissioners. My name is Madeline Kovacs, and I am testifying today for the members of Portland for Everyone in support of the Fremont Apartments project and in opposition to the appeal request by the Pearl District NA. I begin by asking Council to please keep in your thoughts during these proceedings all of those Portlanders who are desperately seeking housing, are currently working, or don't have the time or the resources to come and testify before you today.
Excuse me, folks. You heard the rules right up front. And I made it very clear that you were going to hear opinions that were different than your own. And you heard people listening to your position respectfully. You need to do the same. Otherwise, you will be asked to leave. Please continue.
The developers on the Fremont Apartments actively engage with the neighborhood, adapting plans that are allowed outright under Portland Code to address local concerns and on due diligence. Plans were amended multiple times to accommodate concerns. Current condo residents fighting apartment towers similar to the ones they live in and that were allowed at the time they move in is ironic. We must also be clear about what is under consideration today and what is not. View corridors were established by an arduous, long-range planning process, and the views discussed today in relation to this project were not among them. I would be remiss if we did not note that Portland for Everyone would support the project even more enthusiastically if the team had opted not to include parking and had instead opted in voluntarily to the city's new inclusionary housing program. That said, we need more housing of all stripes, and projects that meet land use and design requirements, provide enhanced public benefits, must be allowed to be built. This is also a key point for those concerned with protecting Portland's most vulnerable residents and other places from further displacement. As the White House said a few years ago in its Housing Development Toolkit, when new housing development is limited region-wide, and particularly in neighborhoods of political capital to implement stricter local barriers, the new housing that does get built tends to disproportionately concentrate in low-income communities of color, causing displacement and concerns of gentrification in those neighborhoods. Portland City Council must be steadfast in demonstrating leadership and making decisions that will support our city's stated vision for the future. We must consider this and all projects cumulatively, and in light of our stated long-range planning goals, the Climate Action Plan, the Comprehensive Plan, equity and anti-displacement goals. We must ensure that the continued build-out of Portland's urban core while enabling walking, biking, and the use of transit, a proposal to build hundreds of units in our downtown core on an empty parking lot, accomplishes our public policy goals for public health, climate mitigation, and affordability. Portland is in a declared housing crisis, but we did not get here overnight. Part of the solution is strengthening tenants' rights, part of the solution is securing more funding for affordable housing, and part of the solution is making sure that we do not continue to chronically underbuild housing, especially in our best connected places if we are serious about addressing this issue. As a city, we must choose to live out our values and prioritize housing our full community over the objections of a few individuals, probably on every project.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Alan Kessler. I'm here to support the project. This is an extraordinary waste of time. It's an extraordinary waste of money. Counsel for Appellant is very good at what she does. She's not cheap. The architects here are very good at what they do. They're not cheap. And to bring them through 4 rounds of design review, 4 voluntary meetings with the neighborhood, and then for council to, you're required to entertain and understand, but if you were to override the will of the design committee, that's added expense that any developer coming to the city has to expect will happen to them. So then the calculation on should we build more needed housing in Portland includes this expected cost of hiring attorneys, hiring architects to come to meeting after meeting after meeting, only to be told by council, no, go back to design review and negotiate this some more. This is a process committed over and over again throughout the country in every neighborhood, every community. No neighbor wants more people near them. But this has led to the development patterns we have. This is why we have a need for the affirmatively forwarding fair housing laws and other things to sort of remediate the economic and ability segregation that's been part of the makeup of the way that American cities are built. I would note that each and every one of these units is likely to be Type B ADA or Type B accessible. 2% of them will probably be required to be Type A accessible. So this is 175 accessible units that some neighbors who don't want the view out of their condo to change are coming to they hope to defeat it to make sure these units don't get built. We have an obligation under federal law. We have a moral obligation to have more housing for people with disabilities. We have an obligation, a moral obligation, to create more housing, period, because that's the only way we're going to get through this affordability crisis. So I would ask council to not just deny the appeal, but I would ask you to send a message to neighborhood associations who would leverage ONI resources and their position within the coalition to try to stop needed housing and try to stop accessible housing in the future. I think you should deny this outright in extremely clear terms and make it clear that in the future, neighborhoods can't abuse this process to stop our city from developing the buildings that it needs. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Hi, my name is Patricia Gardner. I was fortunate to live in the Pearl District since 1993 and just recently moved out. And I have to say, I'm kind of a little surprised to be here because I haven't even finished unpacking. But that said, I need to clarify some history and legacy. A lot of the appellants talked about precedent, and I've got some bad news for them. The precedent they're talking about was planned. It's exactly, this building is exactly what was planned. It is what is in code. And the reason I can say that is I was the planning chair who went through the North Pearl Plan, and I sat there and I advocated for this. Our model was not San Francisco, which sprawls forever. Our model was not Chicago, which sprawls forever. Our model was Vancouver, bluntly. And this was the place where the River District, via the Pearl District, was going to reach out and grab the river. And the reason the setback is 25 feet is because we wanted buildings there, and we wanted urban buildings there. And that's what the code says, because that's what we planned on doing. And that was passed in the mid-2000s, and the design guidelines were updated as part of that process. And so what you see in front of you is exactly what the plan was. The Pearl was not supposed to stop at the Fields Park. There was supposed to be a bridge that blocked your view of everything in the Fields Park that brought you to the river. This is in the Peter Walker Master Plan. This is in every plan that's been done in the Pearl. You were supposed to go to the river and look at the river. You weren't supposed to stop in the Fields Park. You were supposed to go to the river. And you were supposed to go to restaurants, and it wasn't supposed to be privatized. It was supposed to be a place that all Portlanders could use. And so, yeah, they're 100% correct. You are creating precedent, and you are creating the precedent that was planned. And if you don't do this, you're going to get a lot of people going, well, I don't want 2-story buildings, or I don't want 3-story buildings, and so why don't we make it a park? And I'm sure, Commissioner Fritz would have a problem when people are coming to ask for park money for, what we want. And so I think that you're right. It's a turning point. Do you support the plans and the zoning codes that have been done over the past 25 years? Because this is what you got, because this is where it was headed to the whole time. Thank you.
Patty, can I ask you a question? Because you've waited a long time and you haven't been able to unpack. So, and thank you for your letter. But let's concede everything you say in your letter. Just speaking for this member of this body, which by law has to review a decision when it's brought to us. If I agreed with everything in your letter, I think you and I would still agree that it is our function as a council to make sure the public is getting a meaningful greenway and that it is accessible. Mm-hmm. So that's something that I think you would all agree you'd want us to make sure. We'd want to generally make sure it's a building that's well designed, although I don't set myself up as the arbiter of that generally. But and this council has been extremely flexible on design issues. We've actually gone against the Design Commission a couple of times just to incentivize use of new and innovative materials. I think that you would want us, as the mayor just did, to probe the question about could this project be greener? Now, we may or may not have the legal right to push it through this proceeding, but the fact that this is not a LEED, gold or not LEED anything is of some concern because our climate action standards mandate. We've tightened up our code requirements for eco roofs accordingly, and I think you'd want us to be looking at the question of who's being served by the building. Now, I generally subscribe to the idea that more product over time is going to be good because there'll be inevitably market corrections, and we've also got to have a variety of housing. I am concerned that 95% or more of the housing we're building is luxury housing that is out of sync with the ability of the people that both of you have spoken about, and that might even be covered by federal law and fair housing can afford. So I'm a little chagrined that there's been this huge rush to put permits in to get around IZ. There's a huge missed opportunity. And there was no way around it. We couldn't make it retroactive. But the 15 to 20,000 units will not be affordable under our new law because of it. So I just want to say, in respect, I think, Patty Gardner's come before us many times. She has lots of important things to say. But even if I agree with everything in your letter, I still think we have a role to play in making sure it's good design, it's as green as possible, that the public amenities are truly public and accessible, and to push a little bit on affordability. Because this, to my knowledge, is not an affordable development. It's not required to be, but I think it is our role to flag that issue from time to time.
So a couple thoughts. One, I would ask the developer, could they meet LEED standard? One thing that you should know about LEED is it's wicked expensive. Really.
Or an alternative. I know there's other.
It's expensive. And so, you know, the fact that they have a green roof, the fact that they have bicycle parking, I bet you if they did the math, you know, went through the little check sheet that LEED had, I wouldn't be surprised if this building actually meets it. And so that's one question I would ask the developer, because when you're doing a development, it's expensive, and that $200,000 that's not a small sum, and that's what it basically costs. So that's one thing I would say. The other thing I would say is one interesting side effect. So I had to live in an apartment building. I'm going to tell you a short story. I had to live in an apartment and for the last 3 years, and what I found is that because of all the housing that's coming on board, there are a lot. People aren't raising their rents; they're lowering their rents. There are people are giving months and months of rent away. The one bonus that I don't know if you're aware of is by all the housing coming online, I think you're going to find rents fall. And so it may not meet low income, but it could potentially meet workforce. And that is something that we are also woefully under. We don't have enough workforce housing, and we really don't have enough workforce housing in the downtown core. And I think if you were to do a survey of the apartments in the Pearl, I think it would be very interesting to see where their rents have gone over the last year. So that's just something to keep in mind from a context point of view.
Yeah, and Patty, thank you for the clarification on LEED standards, since I opened that can of worms. You are correct. For me, it's really about the outcomes, not so much the nice medallion, although it is pretty. It really is about the outcomes, and as Commissioner Fish correctly pointed out, we have aggressive climate action standards for this city, and that means everybody needs to do their part, and we have an opportunity here to help go at least a portion of the way towards our goals.
Great.
So it really is about outcomes, and thank you for reminding us on that. Great, thank you. And was there some, oh, hello, Sue, how are you?
Hello, good.
Good. Is there anybody else signed up?
We have two more, please.
Okay.
Nielsen Abil and Kurt Schultz.
Very good, thank you.
I mean, after 8 hours of council, Carla gets a break?
You want me to go first?
Yes,
Okay,
sir. Why
great.
don't you go ahead and start?
Yeah, I'm Kurt Schultz. I'm the president of Sarah Architects, and our firm values sustainability and good urban planning, and we've been in business in Portland for nearly 50 years now. I am here in support of this project because I think it does embody those values that I just discussed, but I'm also here to support the Design Commission and the zoning code as it is written. I go before the Design Commission and the design review body quite often, and the staff and the Design Commission takes the guidelines and the rules and the zoning code and the standards very, very seriously. Even though they're not paid, they really look at these very closely. And I had the pleasure to actually be able to sit through some of these design commissions on this project. I have no involvement in this project. I was there for other hearings, but I saw how diligently they really looked at this project to make sure it fit with the rules and fit with the standards. And as Patty said, these standards have been in place for over 20, 25 years. This just happens to be the first time this has happened on the north side of NATO. But I've actually looked at it myself, and the way I believe it does follow the rules, the standards, and the guidelines of this area. And I think what's important to also think about is the way that the guidelines are changing with the new 2035 plan. With the new 2035 plan, Central City Plan, a lot of the things we're discussing today are going away. The height is going to be increased from 175 to 250 feet. And the 45-degree angled setback on the greenway is going away, and actually some of the width and bulk guidelines are going away. So essentially the rules that you guys are adopting and the Planning Commission is adopting is actually increasing the amount of density you can do on these sites, not decreasing it. And people and developers and the community, they're very interested in this and counting on this. And when you talk about a precedent, if you approve the appellants here, what that's doing is it's going to really change how people are looking at all these properties. And there's a lot of developers looking at developing those properties with significant portions of IH now. They're one of the few areas I know where I've been talking to developers who are very interested in building IH units along that waterfront.
Here.
In conjunction with larger towers and IH product. So if you agree to this appeal, that's going to throw all the rules that we're playing with now out the window. We're not going. Developers are not going to even know what the rules are anymore, and so essentially, you will not only lose housing, you are going to be losing probably some significant chunks of IH units that I believe are actually going to be happening in this portion of the district. So I would urge you to uphold the good work of the Design Commission.
Thank you.
And follow the rules that have been adopted.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Good afternoon, sir.
My name is Nelson Abil. I am a 26-year resident in the Pearl District. I'm a co-founder of the Pearl District Neighborhood Association and a co-author of the bylaws of the Pearl District Neighborhood Association. I'm here today to oppose the appeal basically on the way that it was brought to the city. One of the key elements of the bylaws of the Pearl District Neighborhood Association when we founded it in 1992 was that we gave the Planning Committee executive power. And the reason for this was we created a committee that has been for 25 years run by professionals and architects, urban planners, geographers, retired New York real estate consultants, and there were requirements to be on that committee if you wanted to get on, of sitting in on meetings, taking a seminar, learning something about urban planning. And over the years, the planning committee of the Pearl District has tweaked plans, dealt with developers, done all kinds of things, and and work with the Design Commission and the Planning Commission. And this appeal overrode a vote on this project by the Planning Committee. And I am here because I am concerned about the future of the Neighborhood Association and its Planning Committee to engage with architects and developers. And when the architect for this project said he met with the PDNA, he was meeting with the Planning Committee. He was not meeting with the Pearl Board. And the Pearl Board takes anybody who wants to sign up for it and get elected to it. And they are overriding a professional committee that works with design and planning. And so therefore, I think it's a very poor precedent for a neighborhood association that for 25 years has dealt with the design overlay of our community and has built what we now see to be the most successful urban renewal district in the country.
Thank you. Thanks, gentlemen. Are there any more opponents of the appeal? Very good. So the appellant, if they so choose, have 5 minutes for rebuttal. Do we still have Commissioner Saltzman on the line?
Yes.
Okay, good. Just checking. I heard a click, Dan, and I was just worried we might have lost you there.
We need a hologram.
Jeff Kleinman, attorney for Pearl District Neighborhood Association. Thanks for the opportunity to rebut. I want to be clear on a few things. And first of all, dealing with this case and trying to work up the appeal, I wound up having to deal with my own confusion relating to how you tie in the FAR bonuses to the modifications, et cetera. And I want to clarify that because I think I have figured it out. To the extent that there is a qualification for bonuses, and the mayor made reference to that. You still are limited as the developer to the maximum height and all the other requirements unless you get modifications. Okay, so the maximum height here without modifications, whether you get 2, 10, or 1 million bonuses, is 100 feet. Okay, this proposal is continuously described as 175 feet. Actually, it's 185 feet with the parapet for the mechanicals, so it's an 18.5-story building right on the river. To be approved for modifications, you have to comply, any modifications, with 33.825.040 A and B both. And these require that the resulting development will better meet the applicable design guidelines. And we've given you a zillion reasons why they do not. And B, on balance, the proposal will be consistent with the purpose of the standard for which a modification is requested. And the purpose of the height and other standards is to protect the neighborhood from overbuilding, especially on that side of the barrier formed by Front Avenue and the railroad, and to protect the greenway and such factors. Not all the witnesses were lawyers, thank goodness for all of us, and I don't mean this defensively, Mayor, but most of the testimony went to the criteria that we have identified in our written materials, even though folks didn't identify the criteria. And I would certainly refer the members of the council to the proposed findings that we have drafted and look in particular on page 7, this is very lengthy, at the criteria of the North Pearl Subarea Height Opportunity Area, and the ones we've then highlighted in our discussion as not being met. Facilitate visual and physical access to and along the riverfront for all members of the public. Create expanded opportunities for views of the river as viewed from Nadeau Parkway and Front Avenue. It is not happening. It is the opposite that is proposed here. Ensure that bonus height granted to sites adjacent to the Fremont Bridge does not significantly affect views, etc. It certainly does. And this property is in the same ownership as the property next to it, which is to be developed next, directly adjacent to the bridge. Under Oregon law, we treat them as both adjacent to the bridge. They're in common ownership. So,
can I ask you a question, sir?
Sure.
This comes up in a number of our land use proceedings where there's a potential worse outcome from the applicant's point of view if the council grants the relief and this development comes back under a different set of rules. So what is your understanding of what would be allowed under the current proposals under consideration by the council for Central City 2035?
I'm not sure I understand the two components of the question. You mean vis-a-vis what will change in 2035?
Yeah, under Central City 2035,
right,
where we are looking to upzone throughout the city. What is your understanding for this parcel of what would happen if, let's say, we had granted the appeal and the developer came back after Central City 2035 had been adopted? Mm-hmm. What would be as of right under the current proposal the council is considering?
I am not absolutely certain as to most elements, but one element would be a 50-foot greenway setback.
So a 50-foot greenway setback.
Instead of what there is proposed
But it is quite
here.
likely that the height would go up.
If that is a correct understanding of what's allowed. But in the meantime, we've got the laws that we have got, and these folks are not in compliance. I would add that the applicant's attorney stated that the additional height above 150 feet, I'm sorry, above 100 feet is a modification. So, and these modifications in no way better comply with the criteria. The applicant, in an email which I have seen, threatened the board of the neighborhood association, saying if you go ahead and appeal, we can just go ahead and build, you know, this 10-story building that looks like this. So why not go ahead and apply for something that's allowed and subject it to design review? The association's prepared to live with that. And by the same token, going back to your question, Commissioner, if there's a reapplication, there's no need to comply with inclusionary zoning requirements for affordable housing. If the height is higher and that's the law, that's going to be the law. So right now we're dealing with the law as it is, and we'll take our chances with changes which take effect later.
Even though, I mean, let's be clear, and I don't know the answer to this because I don't have a perfect recall of what's under consideration for Central City 2035, but a different application may result in something that from the point of view of your client is even worse as a right.
That is hypothetically correct.
200.
It could be.
It might be more than hypothetically. So, I mean, that's something to consider. I mean, it reminds me, Mayor, of the conversation we had recently where you gently pointed out to some neighbors in Southwest Portland that it isn't a question of whether there's going to be development. There will. There is a question of whether it will be someone from the community working with the neighbors or whether it's an out-of-town developer who comes in and operates in a different context. And I mean, I want to be mindful of the fact that, you know, you might, from your point of view, win a battle but lose the war if under 2035 a building as of right is even from your point of view less contextual, less beneficial, has fewer public benefits.
I think that is possible. What I would also say, because I am not the directly affected person, I'm the lawyer, that my clients are sophisticated and I would imagine have taken this into account. So, and they are also not opposed to rather intense development of the site so long as it is compliant. And this is simply not, and if you look at the precedents that they have argued, Waterfront Pearl as a basis for a modification and the Bridgetown Lofts as the basis for another, those are terrifically coherent in context projects, and this is not, and this is just a behemoth and a monolith by comparison. You know, Commissioner, I hope I'm not being rude and I'm not blowing off in any way the argument that you've presented, but I really do believe that the board of the neighborhood association in this neighborhood has taken that into account, or they would not have gotten so heavily engaged.
Sir, after 10 years of doing this job, it would take a lot more than that for me to accuse you of being rude. It would probably have to be in the death threat category, which I've had some experience with, for that to even get in the zone of rudeness. So
I'm still an active member of the bar, so no.
I appreciate your sensitivity on this issue.
I don't plan on retiring either, so it's probably not going to happen. Anyway, what will happen if, you know, in the subsequent applications that are filed under the current zoning in effect and the current criteria, once this sets the precedent, is the building of a wall, not on the Mexican border, but on the Willamette here, and that this will completely blow out the existing context of the riverfront in that area and the notion of stepping down to the Willamette. In terms of the process, well, let me make a request before my time ticks out. The applicant's attorney has requested an open record period, I believe a couple of days, to supply some additional materials, and we have a right to respond to what is submitted. So I, in turn, would ask for the record to be held open by at least an equal number of weekdays so that we can follow the response that due process and statutes entitle us to.
Very, very well, and we will take that under consideration. Thank you.
Yes,
any
thank you.
further questions?
Thank you.
Commissioner Saltzman, any questions?
No question.
Very good. Commissioner Udaley, you wanted to see staff again, correct?
Yes.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Ben Nelson, please come back. Oh, I have several questions for you, but I want to start by asking if there's any way that you could elaborate on the dissenting opinion of the chair, Julie Livingston, because all we have are these specific areas of concern, but no real explanation or context for those concerns.
So I think this gets at Commissioner Fish's question from earlier. There is a small written section in the final findings in the conclusion section.
Yeah.
That represents her dissenting opinion.
Okay.
That's the extent of it. It's really touching on just a couple points, as I recall.
Okay. All right, so I just need to get clarity on some of the modification requests.
Sure.
Why are we allowing extra height to accommodate mechanical equipment? Why aren't we requiring the developer to include that within the 175 feet?
That's a good question. This is a modification that actually comes up quite a bit, especially in the central city. The modification for the mechanical screen and the mechanical equipment falls under the base zone standard, the EX zone. So that's in chapter 33.140 of the zoning code, which is a different standard than what allows the building to be built up to 175 feet. The building can't go any higher than that based on code in chapter 33.510, but the base zone allows for exceptions to the height standard for certain amounts of mechanical equipment, stairwells, elevator overruns, things like that. And that's what category this mechanical screen falls into. So the commission often hears modification requests for this and often grants them if the mechanical screen or mechanical equipment, in this case, are found to be coherently integrated into the overall building design.
Okay, thank you. I'm pretty impressed that you have all those
I deal with it a
code
lot.
numbers memorized. Okay, similarly, why are we allowing the length of the facades to exceed, what is it? It's
200 feet.
Well,
Or are you
oh
talking
no, the
about
one I'm looking at
tower?
is facades above 100 feet to exceed 120 feet in length. And I think I heard that those codes will be changing.
I'm not terribly familiar with the future code, but under current code, floor plates and facade lengths above 100 feet in height are limited. However, the same standard allows the option for a modification to be considered to extend building lengths from 120 feet up to 150 feet. So they can't go beyond 150. In this case, I believe one is around 125, 128, and another is 140 something.
Okay. The shadow standard,
Yes.
why are we giving an exception to that?
The commission found that since the standard would essentially be met at 1 p.m. as opposed to noon, that they found that was basically meeting the purpose of the standard and for all the other reasons.
Okay. I think you may have said that.
I did, but that was a
several
long
hours
time ago.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I apologize. The setback issue, I'm not as concerned with as I was originally, because I understand that's another thing that's going to go away.
Mm-hmm.
But can you give the rationale on that? And that not pertaining to the easement, but pertaining to the height over 35 feet in that little section of the building that is encroaching in that
Right.
area.
I think that rests on a few reasons. And actually, if I could get my presentation back up, it might be easier
That'd be
to
great.
visually describe it. Let's see.
And at the same time, you could address item 5E, which is another exception to building dimension. Just wanting to understand the rationale behind all these modifications.
So those do fall under the same standard.
Okay.
So for the modification to allow the building to extend into this angled setback basically rested on, it says here, guidelines A2, enhance Portland themes, A5, enhance, embellish, and identify areas, and A5-1-1, reinforce the identity of the Pearl District. And that's basically talking about providing better views of the Fremont Bridge. Again, this kind of goes back to the main argument that is being made on both sides. Allowing massing floor area to be placed into the tower component of the building as opposed to the lower story areas, which would bring it closer to the river or could impact views from the perspective of the Fields Park towards the Fremont Bridge. So it was for a combination of reasons that the commission found that this was acceptable. The other reason is that it allows planted rooftop area on the lower roofs to be closer to the greenway. So that's, I think, a lesser reason. As for the 230-foot 9 inches building length as opposed to the required 200 feet. Again, the commission was considering guidelines that talk about linking the river to the community, emphasizing Portland themes, the identity of the waterfront, and making the plaza and park and open space successful. They're going from memory of what the more detailed findings say. This modification was basically based on having a narrower building in the direction parallel to the river. So in that direction, looking along Northwest NATO Parkway, the building is only about 180 feet in width. And the 200-foot dimension applies in that direction as well. So it was a trade-off in the commission's mind to allow a longer building perpendicular, which opens up a wider space towards the river.
Okay, and then my last question pertaining to the modifications might be a parks issue, but I am curious, and again, you may have addressed this many hours ago, about the kind of lowering of the landscaping requirements, in particular trees. Why are we doing that?
Are you speaking specifically to modification, I think it was
6 and 7.
7? 6 wasn't even addressed in the appeal, so I didn't talk about it at all.
And 7.
I can if you want.
That's all right.
7 was limited to a very tiny area adjacent to the driveway, between the driveway and the south property line. The commission felt that the requested modification was sufficient here. There was no need to pull the driveway back an extra 3 feet to get a few trees here, when another building could conceivably come in next year or next month, building up to the property line there as well on the adjacent parcel. So it's a more urban condition the way it is.
And then my last question is whether or not you can give us any clarity on this issue of calculation of buildable.
Yes. I actually have a slide prepared for that,
Oh,
but I didn't show you,
look at you.
due to time constraints.
Good.
I think it was this one. Of course, I don't have my notes. But this diagram, the areas shaded in red are areas that the appellant have contended don't apply towards the site area or towards calculating allowable development area. Not shaded is the Willamette River, which they also added today. It was not in the original appeal documents. I won't address the river portion because I don't particularly have expertise in that area. We have a separate land use case underway to specifically divide this site off from the rest of the larger site, and that hasn't concluded yet, but we're using that site definition as the basis for the land use hearing today. For the greenway setback that's shown in the red color there, and also for the plaza, those are not right-of-way dedications that have been asserted by several people today. The greenway setback is specifically an easement, and the public plaza, I don't even recall if that's an easement or not. The code merely says it must be accessible to the public and with signs posted telling them such. So they remain part of the site, which means they remain potentially developable. The building is not precluded from going in either of those areas. So it is allowed to be counted towards development area. And that's a very common thing when there are public spaces proposed.
Thank you.
Sure.
Very good. Any further questions? Commissioner Saltzman, any questions of staff?
No.
Very good. Thank you very much. So at this point, I will go back to legal counsel and ask if you could summarize our options at this particular point, noting that we had a request from both parties to be able to review additional documents if documents are submitted. On the part of the developer, they wanted at least a couple of days, and then the appellant wanted a couple of days to be able to review those documents should the council choose to keep the record open.
So whether or not you keep the record open for additional evidence is entirely at council's discretion. If you are going to do so, I would suggest that you have a certain number of days. It is traditionally 7 days. If the parties are fine with 2 or 3, it's really up to you. And then there would be so all parties the record would be open to all parties for a certain number of days. Then there would be a second period of time that would be essentially rebuttal time. I would probably have it be about the same amount of time during which people would not submit evidence but could respond to the evidence before. It is often traditional to have the appellant the applicant to have the final 7 days based on some statutory language. We have in the past interpreted it not to apply, so that's really, I would say, at the applicants. If they make a big deal of it, then maybe they want the last word. We could decide to allow them so we don't have an appeal issue on that. But
so in that case, just so I understand, that would be keeping the written record open, is that correct? Or would that also create an opportunity for a future hearing?
Well, so if we're talking about keeping the record open, that's one option. Another option is to simply continue the hearing, let people come in and testify in evidence again. You could do that. You could also decide you don't want any more evidence in the record at all. You could close the record at this point and make a tentative decision, deliberate and make a tentative decision. Those are the options on the table.
And one moment, Commissioner Fish. So option number 2, if we went that route, the testimony would be solely on new evidence provided since this hearing. Is that correct?
You could have it. You could limit it in that way.
Okay, I just wanted to be.
It would be more typical to decide either to continue it and have everything all the new issues dealt with there, or have the record held open.
Very good. Commissioner Fish.
So, Mayor, I just want to acknowledge that we've been at it since about 10 o'clock this morning, and this has been a long and very thoughtful and informative hearing. The applicant has proposed to put in a submission on this legal question of how you calculate the footprint for the bonus, and we would have to then give some additional time to the appellant to respond to that. I saw the applicant shaking her head, the lawyer, about needing an additional reply to that. So I think we could probably get, if this was the council's choice, I think we could get agreement on a 7-week period for a submission, a 7-week response. And I'll just speak for myself. There's a couple of issues that I'd like to review in the record before I make my decision. I think I know where I'm heading on this one, but I would benefit from a little more time. And frankly, given that we've been going straight all day, I just think my brain would benefit from a little refresh. And I know we don't often do this, But one proposal that I would ask us to consider, to see if it's acceptable to the council, is that we keep the record open for 14 days, as has been suggested by council, close the record, and then come back solely for the purpose of deliberating. So no more testimony. We would just come back for the purpose of deliberating on a time certain. And we are not, according to our attorney, we're not under a strict deadline in terms of the clock. So we would have the opportunity to set a time that works for us and the parties without that clock, you know, the 100 and whatever day clock staring us in the face.
Okay, so your proposal, if I could restate it so I have clarity, is the applicant would have the time to submit
7 days.
7 days in which to submit their testimony. The appellant would have 7 days to review that, and then we would come back at a time certain sometime in 14-ish days.
Or more.
Or more.
On a time certain to deliberate.
To deliberate.
Solely for the record would close at that point. We come back solely for the
And so we would
purpose.
take no additional public testimony at that time. It would simply be the appellant, or the applicant and the appellant. Is that correct?
That would be fine. I will make one suggestion, though.
Certainly.
It is clear there's an issue oversight area. I'm not sure why you wouldn't have that first record period be available to both parties to submit any evidence they wish to during that 7 days, and then the second 7 days is for either party to respond to that evidence. So it's mutual.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
So
Okay.
either party can submit evidence within the first 7 days, and either party can respond to that evidence in the second 7 days. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yes, and I'd be interested in knowing whether either of the attorneys have any objection to that.
Jeff Kleinman, no objection.
Allison Reynolds, and we don't object, but we don't really need 7 days, so if you wanted a shorter period, that would be fine with us.
Well, we're going to have, I think, a challenge finding a time certain, but we're not under the clock.
How do we look as far as time certain?
Oh, what date are we looking at?
Let's assume 14 days out.
14 days, okay. March 7th, is that Tuesday? The morning of March, how much time?
An hour?
An hour?
Well, just truth in labeling. We put things down for 15 minutes and they go 2 hours. So just an hour, but probably we don't need a whole hour.
Thursday, March 8th at 2 is available, but Commissioner Saltzman is absent.
Do we have Commissioner Fritz also?
She's back then,
When,
yes.
when would we have all four who've been participating so far?
For an hour.
Or half an hour?
You know, we could squeeze you on the morning of the 7th at, let's say 10:15.
And we have all the commissioners there?
What
Yes,
if we
the
go
morning.
one more week, Carla? What do we get? Do we get any more?
Not, it'd be either 4 o'clock or 10:30 on the 14th.
So when we're going to get within 14 days materials, we're going to want to review them. So without regard to time limit, what's the next time that seems to work for everybody?
The very next one would be the 7th, March 7th, in the morning.
That's the 10:15 slot?
Right.
Does that work for legal counsel on both sides? Okay, I'm
So
seeing head nods.
I would suggest then that the materials be due at the 6th, because if they're due, say, 5 p.m. the 7th, that doesn't help you very much, so.
No, I would agree. So the first timeline then would be when? The submittal of documents needs to be by what date?
Let's have it due the 28th by 5 p.m., submitted to the council clerk, and then any rebuttal to that would be due March 6th at 5 p.m., also to the council clerk.
Okay, so in technical language, then, we are continuing the hearing till March 7th, time certain, 10:15 a.m. The record is open on both sides until February 28th at 5 p.m. The record will close at 5 p.m. on March 6th. Correct?
Yes, the record for new evidence closes on the 28th. Rebuttal testimony allowed until March 6th. And the rebuttal testimony is pertaining to new evidence submitted by the 28th.
And Mayor, we often at this moment encourage parties, particularly in that second submission, to be guided by the virtue of brevity. So.
And I'd also add that given that the hearing is on the 7th at 10:30, to the extent the parties can get their materials in well before the 6th, that would probably be helpful to council.
And I just want to correct that. It is March 7th at 10:15, is it not?
I'm certain it's March 7th at 10.
March 7th, okay, so we're all clear. The key dates here are February 28th at 5 p.m., March 6th at 5 p.m., and then the hearing itself is March 7th at 10:15 a.m. Both sides got that? And we will notice this. Very good. We are continued. Without further ado, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.